This has to be the most ridiculous transmigration in history. A man transmigrated into a magic book, and for 300 years, no one has opened him. Lonely and frustrated, he cursed in the library, but no one could hear him. In this empire, there are many great mages. Their theories are mandatory courses for every student, but one magic tome was going crazy with complaints. Those so-called heroes and sages were all idiots. To teach them back then, he had poured in countless efforts. He didn't originally belong to this world. His memory ended with a car accident. When he opened his eyes again, he had become a magic tome recording endless knowledge. After the initial panic passed, he found joy in being a book. That was cultivating mages and witnessing the birth of legends. History's great names had all held him in their hands and read from him. Just open the pages, and vast knowledge would flow into their minds. Facing ferocious monsters, they could instantly find ways to deal with them. Although he had a bad temper and often scolded students harshly. Over thousands of years, teaching geniuses became his only solace. Whenever a wielder passed away, he would be transported to a new place. But this time, he had been dormant in the library for a full 300 years. The loneliness of being ignored nearly drove him insane. He desperately prayed inside, "Anyone, please come read me." Just then, a boy looking for books passed by the shelf. Though he knew the other couldn't possibly hear him, the magic tome still shouted excitedly. Only those who touch him or have a contract with him can hear his voice. The boy still left. Just as the magic tome gave up hope, a hand reached for the shelf. The boy precisely took him down. The magic tome suppressed his excitement and called out in the most composed tone. The boy was startled by the voice appearing out of nowhere and looked around. He revealed his prestigious identity as the legendary magic tome Grimoire. The boy, half believing, followed the instructions and opened the cover. Brilliant golden light burst forth, and the pages flew around like living things. A magic circle unfolded beneath the boy's feet, reflecting countless future images. Those images showed him advancing from apprentice all the way to grand mage. The boy collapsed to the ground, utterly shocked by this fantastical scene. The magic tome solemnly declared this was the future they would create together. He would awaken the boy's astonishing talents and forge a new legend. But this was all a lie. He sensed no magical talent whatsoever. This was just sweet talk to lure the boy into reading him. However, the boy said he didn't want to become a mage. His dream was to become a knight. The magic tome froze instantly, feeling a wave of despair inside. He urgently asked the boy's name and learned the boy was called Chenna. The magic tome improvised and proposed the concept of a magic swordsman, he explained, wielding a sword with one hand and casting magic with the other. How cool is that? At this moment, yearning began to appear in Chenna's eyes. He imagined that heroic figure in his mind, his heart racing uncontrollably. Magic swordsman. This title did sound both powerful and cool. The magic tome struck while the iron was hot, urging him to open the pages again. Chenna excitedly complied. A complex magic circle emerged from the pages. Ancient contract terms appeared, announcing they would be bound to each other from now on. A unique pattern appeared on the back of Chenna's hand. Grimoire was overjoyed inside. The 300-year wait had finally ended. His cultivation game could finally restart. But Chenna suddenly fell into regret. He remembered he came from a knight family where learning magic was taboo. If discovered by his family, he might be completely expelled. With a trembling voice, he expressed his wish to back out to the magic tome. Grimoire's joy instantly froze, transforming into towering rage. He angrily scolded, "Are you afraid of your father's scolding?" Chenna timidly admitted that was part of the reason. 300 years of waiting coming to nothing nearly drove Grimoire mad. In his panic, Chenna thought of a solution, proposing to introduce new students. Grimoire coldly shattered his fantasy. The contract couldn't be changed. Until the wielder died, he couldn't contract with anyone else. He cursed Chenna as a bastard. "If you couldn't do it, why did you sign?" Chenna could only apologize repeatedly, filled with guilt. But soon, a surge of anger at being deceived replaced the guilt. He suddenly realized this book had pressured him first. He'd had enough and decided to end this absurd farce. He shoved Grimoire back into the deepest part of the shelf and coldly told him, "If you could wait 300 years, you can wait until I die." Grimoire shouted at his retreating back but couldn't stop him from leaving. He forced himself to calm down and tried to use his authority power. Grimoire commanded him to stop, but Chenna's footsteps didn't pause for a second. Grimoire completely panicked. This meant he would have to wait endlessly again. Despair and anger overwhelmed his reason, and he issued the most vicious curse. He cursed him to fall immediately, smash his head, and die on the spot. As soon as the words fell, Chenna stepped on a fallen page. His foot slipped, he lost his balance, and fell heavily to the ground. Then blood spread out. The black-haired boy lay in a pool of blood and never moved again. It wasn't until half an hour later that the body was discovered. The library returned to silence at night, as if nothing had happened. Grimoire felt complicated inside. There was brief pity, but more than that was unwillingness and anger at waiting 300 years for nothing. He began to fantasize about what magnificent place he'd be transported to. Of course, it might also be some poor person's stinking home. Either way, it had to be better than this damned shelf. Just then, clear footsteps sounded in the silence. Then the sound of a lock being picked. The door was pushed open, and a cloaked student slipped inside. She moved moved cautiously with clear purpose, definitely not an ordinary thief. She moved quickly between tall bookshelves, seemingly searching for something. A thought flashed through Grimoire's mind. Could she be looking for me? He suddenly realized midnight bells were about to ring. The moment of transportation was coming. In just 1 minute, huge panic gripped him. He couldn't miss this opportunity. He used all his strength to send a silent call to that figure. Please, look this way. Read me. At the last moment, the girl seemed to sense something and turned around. Her gaze locked onto him, and she rushed over quickly. Her hand reached for the spine. The 12 o'clock bells rang right on time. Grimoire sighed inside. In the same chapter, he had welcomed his second contractor. After the tension passed, the girl breathed a sigh of relief. Grimoire was secretly alarmed. She could actually avoid all surveillance to enter the library. The magic tome suddenly emitted light. A young man appeared from within. He asked the girl's name. The girl softly replied her name was Rayleigh, but she had no surname. Grimoire felt curious and asked how she found him. What puzzled him more was that she could hear his thoughts. That was a fluctuation only contractors or special beings could sense. Rayleigh was also confused. She said she just happened to hear it while wandering around. This answer stirred huge waves in Grimoire's heart. A guess formed in his mind. Could this girl possess mana affinity comparable to dragons? The 1 in 10,000 genius talent among humans might be right before him. If this was true, she would become the greatest apprentice in history. He lightly tapped her nose and solemnly introduced himself, declaring he would cultivate her into a legendary grand mage. Afterward, Rayleigh brought him back to the dormitory. Grimoire noticed the empty beds and asked where the others were. Rayleigh calmly said her roommates all went home for the holidays. Grimoire realized Rayleigh was trying to hide her past. As her teacher, he requested she tell him in detail. Rayleigh lowered her eyes and recounted her terrible childhood. Since she could remember, she'd been reduced to tool number 2 for the Thieves Guild. In the same situation was a boy called number 1. Year after year, she struggled to survive dangerous missions. However, the filth of that environment never spared any weak person. Those greedy gazes directed at her became increasingly disgusting. To protect herself, she once used someone else's blood as a warning. But fear couldn't eliminate desire. Harassment still followed like a shadow. Eventually, escape became the only way out. Grimoire understood. Someone must have discovered her talent and sent her to this top academy as a special recruit. He recalled her infiltration skills, a mark left by her thief life. Then he asked with concern if she was bullied at the academy. Rayleigh paused and mentioned a noble name who helped her. Grimoire promised he would help her make her mark in history. A rough shout suddenly rang out outside the door, shattering the brief peace. Roommates cursed and questioned why the door was locked, leaving them nowhere to sleep. Grimoire was stunned. This was completely opposite to what she just said. He suddenly understood that what she said earlier was probably all lies. 3 arrogant girls burst in. When dawn broke, the one-sided lesson finally ended. Grimoire looked at the bumps on her head from being hit, feeling uncomfortable, but Rayleigh pretended nothing happened, saying their strength was like greenhouse flowers. He sighed and asked why she never fought back. Rayleigh smiled bitterly. Fighting back against nobles would only get her expelled. Grimoire pointed out the core contradiction. In such an environment, where's the time to study? Only 2 paths lay ahead. He clearly stated the pros and cons. 1 was to endure bullying in exchange for a bright future at the academy. 2 was to give up everything. Embrace freedom but an uncertain future. Rayleigh thought for a long time and gave her answer. The withdrawal procedures were surprisingly quick. Less than 3 minutes and it was done. Rayleigh was surprised that only she could see Grimoire's human form. He explained this was just an illusion for easier communication. Then he sighed that leaving the academy was somewhat regrettable. The divine artifacts from the annual arena competition here, special potions for outstanding students, so many privileges and resources would now be beyond their reach. Rayleigh frowned and complained why he didn't say so earlier. Grimoire thought she regretted withdrawing, but she shook her head. It was just that the warehouse and gate were in opposite directions, making her take a detour. Grimoire was momentarily confused, not understanding her meaning. Rayleigh asked matter-of-factly, wasn't he telling her to go take those things? With her talent and his teaching, those rewards would be hers sooner or later. So now, she was just taking back her future possessions in advance. They came to a hidden emergency exit. A fork appeared ahead. Rayleigh admitted she didn't know the direction. Grimoire decided to teach her path-searching magic. Rayleigh said she learned it at the academy, then demonstrated on the spot. Blue light explored in different directions, revealing traps on the left and a dead end on the right. She confidently drew her conclusion and asked for his evaluation. Grimoire affirmed her ability, but also pointed out the problem. Her magic was too conventional, constrained by mediocre rules. He wanted her to break free and think in a more excellent way. He guided her to release magic power in multiple directions simultaneously, teaching her to concentrate and track every particle of magic power. Rayleigh closed her eyes and focused with all her might. When he told her to visualize the particles, she suddenly opened her eyes. A complete map of the entire passage instantly appeared clearly in her mind. At dusk, they had boarded a ship and left the academy behind. Rayleigh's bag was filled with potions and items collected in advance. Grimoire looked at her, his heart full of relief and anticipation. 300 years of waiting had finally brought a free journey and an extraordinary apprentice. But he still had to ask that key question. She withdrew from school just to study magic with him. What was her true purpose behind all this? The great fire from deep in her memory still raged in Rayleigh's dreams. Scorching flames mercilessly devoured what was once their hiding place. Screams and pleas for mercy were completely drowned out by explosions. A hand grabbed her, desperately dragging her toward life. She looked back in horror at that sea of flames that had become hell. A resolute figure stood in the firelight, blocking all danger for them. That image became her nightmare for countless days and nights afterward. Hearing Grimoire's question, she admitted she had to become stronger. Grimoire easily saw through the truth hidden behind that determination. It was clearly the flame of revenge, quietly burning in her eyes. Rayleigh lowered her head, silently acknowledging this heavy answer. Grimoire felt curious and wanted to know the full picture of the tragedy, but he knew well that uncovering others' scars wasn't pleasant. Moreover, her childhood was full of shadows and must be even more bitter. He could learn slowly. There was no need to rush into touching those wounds. However, Rayleigh raised her head and threw the question back at him. She wanted to know why he worked so hard to cultivate mages. Grimoire fell into brief silence. It was about 1,000 years of imprisonment and redemption, but in the end, he gave a cynical answer. He said all this was merely because he found it fun. Returning to their temporary lodging, Rayleigh remembered their real predicament. She had hastily withdrawn from school, and her path ahead suddenly became uncertain. Grimoire reminded her the professor had written a recommendation letter. Rayleigh searched for it and found a strange name on the letter. Reincarnated Tower. Grimoire repeatedly pondered this title. He had no impression of it. It wasn't among any famous towers in his knowledge. He thought the professor would recommend one of the Empire's 5 great towers. Towers were key for mages to accumulate connections and resources. Strength alone was far from enough. Political capital was equally important. The professor's recommendation made him feel inexplicably irritated, but Rayleigh spoke up at this moment, carefully correcting his perception. She explained that Reincarnated Tower was actually one of the Empire's current 5 great towers. She opened a heavy tome, trying to introduce it to him. The pages contained a portrait of a white-haired old man. Grimoire couldn't help questioning why such an aged portrait was used. Rayleigh's answer stunned him. This was actually the person's appearance in his prime, and even more unbelievable, this founder was still alive today. Grimoire stared at that portrait, feeling it was absurd. 300 years was a long imprisonment that seemed endless to him, but for the magic world's landscape, this time wasn't enough to completely overturn things. Something significant must have happened during this period. A passage in the book caught his eye, making him freeze instantly. It said Reincarnated had achieved the miracle of immortality, and this was the lifelong pursuit of Reincarnated's teacher, Grand Mage Marta. Grimoire fell silent because Marta was his previous student. A few days later, they finally arrived at the imperial capital. Rayleigh seemed exceptionally excited, her eyes sparkling with wonder. Grimoire suggested wandering around, and she became as happy as a child. She was attracted by skewers called unicorn, full of anticipation. Grimoire helplessly revealed it was just ordinary mutton. Rayleigh was immediately disappointed, but still stubbornly stuffed the meat skewers into her mouth. Grimoire's attention was drawn to the plaza. There stood statues of 5 grand mages hailed as legends. Rayleigh explained that textbooks called them geniuses with exceptional talent. Grimoire let out a sigh of emotion. In his eyes, they were just a bunch of stubborn fools, but he also admitted they had a kind of unwavering persistence. He took the initiative to bring up the question they hadn't discussed deeply before. His real purpose in cultivating mages was revenge against the bastard who sealed him in the book pages. His student Marta had researched resurrection rituals for this, ultimately failing. And in his clear memory, Marta never took any students. So that Reincarnated must be a shameful imposter. His voice suppressed 300 years of accumulated icy rage. He absolutely couldn't let go of this fraud who dared impersonate his student's disciple. Rayleigh looked at him and suddenly showed a willing yet helpless smile. She extended her hand to him, proposing a simple and direct agreement. She would help him deal with that imposter, and he would help her complete her revenge. Their fists lightly bumped in the air. The contract was made. Grimoire fell into distant memories. In his 5th year as a magic tome, a boy stole him. The boy's name was Fienda. Fienda also gave him a name. That call of Grimoire held extraordinary meaning for him. Fienda was his first contractor during his chaotic period. He longed to repay this encounter. He began patiently teaching the boy how to guide magic power, but Fienda never got the hang of it and progressed slowly. The boy complained he couldn't feel the magic power, only pain. Grimoire thought it was a normal process and encouraged him to endure, until Fienda shouted that his body felt like it was burning inside. He realized something was wrong and scolded the boy for being too hasty, but it was too late. The sight of blood exploding from the boy's brain became an image Grimoire would never forget. He softly called Fienda's name but received no response. The bumping carriage in the sunlight pulled him back to reality. He called to the girl before him. Rayleigh instinctively responded. He immediately reminded her the coachman was present, and she quickly closed her mouth. The power of the contract allowed them to read each other's minds. Rayleigh asked him mentally what the matter was, while complaining why he didn't mention such a convenient magic earlier. Grimoire suddenly hesitated, not knowing how to respond. His true thought was that she was cute when speaking softly, but he knew saying that would definitely anger her. However, through telepathy, Rayleigh had already heard it loud and clear. Grimoire awkwardly quickly changed the subject. He seriously discussed entering Reincarnated Tower's selection process. That was a top tower that only recruited geniuses who had already emerged. Countless mages spent their entire lives preparing for this brutal exam. The nickname Tomorrow's Stars Graveyard showed how fierce the competition was, but he still announced he'd have Rayleigh participate in this year's selection. Rayleigh thought thought this was completely impossible. In just half a year, how could she compare with those intermediate mages? Grimoire's voice was full of unquestionable confidence. He guaranteed that as long as he was there, this was absolutely possible. Late at night, the carriage stopped at a remote forest edge. The coachman left hastily after confirming the location with confusion. Grimoire told Rayleigh this would be their training ground for the next 6 months, also where his former student once lived. Rayleigh was surprised whether his 300-year-old student was still alive. He pointed to a distant tombstone. The answer was no, but hadn't completely died either. His student had become a lich. That was a forbidden realm only grand mages could reach. Rayleigh looked around, seeing only the silent forest. Grimoire said finding the lich was her first test. If she couldn't find him, she had no right to learn his magic. Rayleigh nodded and cast her newly comprehended path-searching magic. In an instant, intense light burst forth. She triggered countless hidden techniques in the forest. Barriers, illusions, and distorted magic layers obstructed her perception. In the darkness, a voice commented this girl was too arrogant. Even intermediate mages took half a year to find him. But Grimoire knew Rayleigh had the capital to be arrogant. Her mana affinity had reached genius level. Just then, Rayleigh suddenly turned around with a sly smile. A beam of precise light shone on the forehead of the skeleton in the darkness. The lich couldn't believe he'd been found so quickly. The lich wanted to act cool with a deep voice, but couldn't help coughing violently. He came out awkwardly, unable to hide his embarrassment. Then he moved close to Grimoire, his tone full of shock and confusion. A barrier that normally takes 2 years to find took her only 10 minutes, and her method was reverse tracking the magic obstructing the path. The lich couldn't help but sigh. This was truly an incredible monster. On the way to the lich's room, the scene made Grimoire secretly frown. Dragon skeletons and 3-headed dog specimens all displayed the owner's bizarre preferences. After they sat down, Grimoire noticed Rayleigh's complexion wasn't good. He immediately warned the lich to restrain his frightening aura. As a lich, his body emitted demonic energy that was burdensome to ordinary people. The lich quickly apologized and restrained himself. Only then did Rayleigh's breathing become smoother. Grimoire reminded him the Empire strictly forbade the existence of liches and black magic. Even thieves' guilds providing raw materials had become symbols of evil. The Empire even had an organization called Heresy Inquisitors to handle these. He turned to ask the lich if anything special had happened over the years. The lich recalled that, 5 years ago, a group of adventurers accidentally intruded. Grimoire was surprised. How could ordinary adventurers find this place? The lich was also puzzled. Perhaps they were just extremely lucky. Those people began attacking his territory, so he had to fight back, and kept them as slaves. He casually summoned an assistant named Jeremy to come add tea. When that armored skeleton approached, both Grimoire and Rayleigh were startled. That wasn't an ordinary adventurer at all, but a death knight. Rayleigh even recognized the sword at his waist. Engraved on the sword was a golden lion emblem. That was the sword carried by the Heresy Inquisitors captain who went missing 5 years ago. The lich hastily defended himself, afraid of being scolded, saying he didn't know their identity. Grimoire felt helpless. Black magic backlash was eroding his reason. He hadn't come to adjust his condition in too long, and his thinking had become somewhat out of control. The lich brought the topic back on track, asking the purpose of their visit. Grimoire said Rayleigh was ready to accept the lich's training. He brought up his previous student Marta again, and explained to the lich about someone impersonating Marta's student as a fraud. They planned to enter that tower and completely dismantle it from within. But the lich questioned why they had to choose the most difficult way to get revenge. Wouldn't it be simpler and more effective to use other towers to suppress them? Grimoire admitted that would indeed be easier but not romantic enough. He enjoyed the thrilling process of slowly destroying enemies from within. The lich couldn't help but complain. This reason was truly twisted. The lich turned to ask Rayleigh's thoughts, worried she'd be in danger. But Rayleigh nodded, finding this method both thrilling and interesting. They soon arrived at the training ground. This was a mysterious space formed by a giant magic circle. Rayleigh was shocked by the strange magic power here. The lich explained time here could be stretched 4 times, equivalent to 2 years of actual training time. After all, only half a year remained, far from enough for ordinary people. Grimoire began analyzing Rayleigh's unique advantages. First was the excellent physical condition granted by her Thieves Guild experience. Second was her innately powerful mana affinity. Therefore, she didn't need to learn complex magic. She only needed to focus on one type. That was the counterspell that could dispel other magic. Dispersion. Rayleigh immediately grasped the strategy. Eliminate the enemy's magic, then engage in close combat. As long as opponents couldn't cast spells, the advantage was on her side. Grimoire expressed his satisfaction that she was correct, and asked the lich to begin teaching. But Rayleigh suddenly raised her hand to stop them, because she hadn't even learned this magic yet. The lich didn't mind, and surrounded Rayleigh with magic power. The lich believed the fastest way to learn magic was to take a few beatings first, after long training. Both Grimoire and the lich fell into silence. Rayleigh lay on the ground, having taken countless hits without making any progress. Grimoire couldn't help but doubt his teaching methods were wrong. The lich pointed out the problem. For the past hour, she'd only been desperately running away. Though Grimoire had known Rayleigh for only 3 days, he'd already seen through her personality. She had extremely strong self-esteem, almost pathologically unwilling to show any weakness. This might stem from the Thieves Guild's mission requirements that tolerated no failure. Psychological pressure from childhood continued to this day, making her fear failure so much. It was this fear that drove her to flee in panic when attacks came, but Rayleigh directly refuted through telepathy, saying she just feared pain. Grimoire smiled to cover his embarrassment, no longer delving into the root of her fear, instead asking where she was confused. Seeing through moves, grasping sources, comprehending techniques, all key points had been told. He told her to calm down and let go of fear. Carefully sense and think. Rayleigh stood up and once again faced the magic orb the Lich was condensing. She felt the surging magic power, recalling his so-called told key points, but he'd only taught 2 types of magic, path searching and telepathy, so what she should do was use these 2 magics to break through. She suddenly smiled, saying she wouldn't ask any more questions. She remembered what he'd advised. Don't be bound by mediocre rules. She would forge her own path just as he expected. The magic circuit was like a complex maze in her eyes. She suddenly opened her eyes. The circuit clearly emerged. She'd walked through this kind of maze twice before, from underground passages to the Lich's lair. The magic tome's main body came to her side, guiding her to break through one by one. The process had to be discreet and careful, like using telepathy for secret conversations. After resisting for who knows how long, blinding light burst forth. Sweat slid down from her forehead. Grimoire smiled and congratulated her. She'd finally succeeded. She felt her sore and numb arms, asking how long it took. Learning it was 4 hours, she thought it was actually only 1 hour, but Grimoire corrected her. 4 hours was in the outside world. She'd actually experienced 16 hours. She knelt exhausted on the ground, but she immediately raised her head, showing a genuine smile. It didn't matter, because she'd already found that feeling. Grimoire also smiled with relief. Seasons quietly changed through the rigorous training, time flying by. Rayleigh kept practicing, first battling monsters, later even sparring with Jeremy. In the blink of an eye, September arrived, entering the cool autumn. The highly anticipated 5 Great Towers selection exam was approaching. When the magic orb attacked again, Rayleigh could now instantly shatter it. The Lich was utterly shocked. The 6 months of training that felt like 2 years had finally ended. Grimoire assessed she could now rival capable intermediate mages. The Lich proposed preparing a delicious dinner to celebrate. Grimoire thanked the Lich. He said once she practiced attack magic, she'd have no more weaknesses. At that moment, a piece of paper fluttered from the Lich's robes, caught by Rayleigh. Written on it in bold letters was Lich World Domination Plan. Seeing the content, both Grimoire and Rayleigh froze. Grimoire questioned whether he'd spent these centuries wanting to rule the world. The Lich awkwardly denied it, then gave up and loudly admitted it. He had indeed thought about it, but only wanted to occupy a small eastern city. Grimoire held his forehead in pain, sensing he'd cause major trouble sooner or later. Or perhaps he'd already caused trouble? The Lich blinked and denied it, saying he really hadn't. Meanwhile, in the Northern Empire, snow and wind raged fiercely. A girl walked alone in the snow, completely unaware of the stalkers behind her. This was the road leading to the magic city of Byheiler. Several bandits had their eyes on this solitary woman. She wore expensive clothes and walked carelessly, seemingly without any guard. The lead bandit pulled his bowstring taut and shot a deadly arrow with a cold laugh. The woman fell to the ground. Blood stained the snow beneath her. The bandit swarmed forward, excitedly looting her expensive possessions. But one subordinate suddenly froze. Trembling, he told the captain to look up. Not far away, the woman who should be dead stood unharmed, showing them an eerie smile. The companion behind them screamed simultaneously. The corpse and treasures vanished into thin air. The captain instantly understood they'd provoked a mage they absolutely shouldn't have. He forced himself to stay calm, having his men form a battle formation. They had superior numbers. Perhaps there was still a slim chance of victory. However, the next second, pain stripped away all his delusions. He looked down and saw his hands separated from his body. Endless fear made his whole body tremble uncontrollably. The woman approached, her smile sweet, yet cruel. Not long after, a white-bearded old man passed by the scene. After surveying the site, he quickly reached a conclusion. This was a one-sided slaughter by a mage. He told the coachman not to bother and to continue forward. The old man returned to the carriage. He noticed the young girl across from him holding a book. The old man initiated conversation, asking her purpose for going to Byheiler. Rayleigh calmly replied it was to participate in the 5 Great Towers selection. The old man immediately frowned, warning her seriously that this was too dangerous. Among all kinds of mages, there were plenty of lunatics who used exams to kill people. Though becoming a junior mage at her young age was rare, it was far from enough. He sincerely advised she should train more in city academies first, but Rayleigh said her mind was made up. The old man shook his head regretfully, lamenting another rising star was about to fall. Grimoire couldn't help complaining this old man was meddling. Rayleigh silently agreed. She also found him too nagging. The carriage arrived at the eternally snowy Byheiler, a shocking sight. In this advanced Magitech city, airships actually floated in the sky. Explosions sounded in the distance, but pedestrians walked past as if used to it. Grimoire observed, sighing. The city's atmosphere remained chaotic. At this moment, Rayleigh was completely clueless with her map. In the shadows, ill-intentioned gazes had already locked onto this unfamiliar face. Rayleigh cast path searching magic, trying to understand the city layout, but her magic power was strongly interfered with, only finding 10 suspicious locations. They could all be the administration office, or academies or research institutes. Grimoire regretted not enduring the nagging to follow that old man. While they discussed, the man stalking them appeared behind them. He greeted them with a friendly smile, seeing she was here for the first time. Grimoire immediately became alert, judging the other was a junior mage. The man enthusiastically explained that residual magic power from experiments interfered with path-finding magic, and hinted that asking kind-looking passers-by was the best solution. Rayleigh asked mentally for a plan, and Grimoire let her decide. After brief consideration, she accepted the man's offer to guide them. Learning she was heading to the selection exam administration office, the man became even more attentive. He led the way while chattering non-stop, praising her youth and promise. Rayleigh silently followed, then suddenly stopped after walking several streets. Worried she was suspicious, the man skillfully fabricated the distance, but Rayleigh calmly interrupted him. She said he'd been casting spells since they met. This statement froze the smile on the man's face. He demanded to know when she discovered it. Rayleigh responded indifferently. From the start, his tone seemed strange. That odd way of speaking was actually hiding magic power in his words. She pointed out it was the first step in casting word spirit curses. The man was stunned for a moment, then burst into exaggerated laughter. He asked with interest why she followed if she knew. Grimoire knew well how sinister that curse was. Once that paralysis curse took effect, the consequences would be unthinkable. She'd be sold to black mages as an experiment subject, or become a slave. In this city, such tragedies always befell children, but Rayleigh only answered lightly that she didn't feel any danger. This completely enraged the already arrogant man. He claimed he must teach her an unforgettable lesson today. Even among junior mages, strength had a vast difference. Grimoire silently agreed. Rayleigh was the undisputed leader of that. Rayleigh asked him how many targets she was. The man proudly claimed 13 people had been deceived by his smile, even boasting his looks were the type that easily made women cry. Both Rayleigh and Grimoire showed contemptuous expressions. Rayleigh followed his words with a fatal blow, guessing his mother must cry about it every night. The man's anger was completely ignited. He growled and used magic, a scorching fireball condensing in his palm, a burning spear thrust out from it, displaying fire affinity. Grimoire objectively evaluated this person used it well, perfect as a target for Rayleigh to improve combat experience. The man hurled the flame spear viciously, going straight for Rayleigh's life, but Rayleigh still stood in place, eyes calm as water, until the spear approached her eyes. Only then did a blue shimmer flash from her eyes. Her thinking accelerated in an instant, dynamic vision surpassing human limits. This was the result of countless training sessions with the Lich. She only needed to concentrate magic power in her brain, and time seemed to slow down. Just as the spear tip was about to touch her, she raised her hand, calmly uttering 2 words, "Dispel." The man's savage smile turned to horror. His fire spear vanished without a trace in an instant. Rayleigh asked flatly if this was the vast difference he mentioned. Grimoire knew Rayleigh's attack method was completely different. She loved using the purest, most direct magic missiles, but their speed was so fast people simply couldn't react. The man watched helplessly as that mass of magic power came at him. He was struck hard, and spat out a large mouthful of blood. Rayleigh summarized the experience for him. Victory or defeat in battle depended more on both sides' traits and talents. However, before finishing her words, she found the man had already stopped breathing. Grimoire instantly collapsed. He meant to have her accumulate combat experience. This outcome was too inappropriate. Rayleigh helplessly said people couldn't be resurrected. The two had to leave and continue searching for that last administration office. They visited 10 suspected locations. Their luck so bad they always missed it. More strangely, no one along the way knew where the administration office was, as if that place was hidden from cognition by some power. At this moment, Grimoire recalled something strange. Those 10 locations on the map, connected to form an inverted pentagram. The entire city had been arranged as a giant magic circle. Those people at the administration office used the city to activate a cognitive obstruction array, plus magic power interception, invisibility, illusions, all to make things difficult for visitors. Following the magic circle's guidance, they pushed open that hidden door. Behind the door was a pure white space. A red-haired woman slowly turned around, smiling as she congratulated Rayleigh on passing the first stage of the selection exam. Mysterious patterns appeared on the back of Rayleigh's hand. With this, she could rest free in Byheiler for a week, but Rayleigh felt this was all too simple. Grimoire pointed out it was all because of her talent in mastering path searching. There were 10 suspected administration office locations in total. She had to visit the other 9. Only then would the real target reveal its whereabouts. Before they left, the administrator suddenly called out a reminder, warning Rayleigh to avoid conflict with examinees as much as possible before the next exam. Rayleigh nodded obediently, but a trace of doubt arose in her heart. After leaving, she immediately asked what deeper meaning was behind those words. Grimoire explained helplessly. There were always lunatics who deliberately provoked to test their strength. Before he finished speaking, Rayleigh had already sensed an unusual aura. Grimoire had noticed it long ago too. In the crowd, a cold killing intent precisely locked onto her. That magic power felt familiar. identical to the corpses they encountered on the way. Grimoire determined the source of killing intent was the murder culprit. Rayleigh used path searching to track the killing intent. She could glimpse the world's outline through magic perception alone. Rayleigh's magic power shuttled through the crowd, quickly locking onto the target. The malice came from a red-clothed woman by the roadside. Rayleigh asked if she should engage. Grimoire suggested waiting for the right moment first. However, the other didn't wait. A red magic orb was already breaking through the air toward them. Too fast. Thoughts of dodging or dispelling couldn't even form. Rayleigh made a snap decision, using dual casting to construct a barrier. She planned to use the barrier to buy time, while preparing a magic missile counterattack. But reality was more brutal. The barrier couldn't stop that magic orb at all. The opponent continued pouring in magic power. The orb didn't penetrate but exploded directly. Blood stained the snow and the magic tome. The next second, Rayleigh stood safely in the bustling crowd. She was bewildered, completely not understanding what just happened. The red-clothed woman had appeared before her. She explained it was just mental combat, a projected illusion. From sensing killing intent to thinking of responses, the brain wove a realistic simulation. The woman asked with a smile, did she truly see her own death just now? Only then did Rayleigh notice the woman's hand also bore the selection mark. Grimoire became vigilant. Ignoring warnings was definitely not a good person. Those traces of magic power at the murder scene showed she was a crazy murderer. He reminded Rayleigh to be extremely careful. However, moments later, they were sitting at the same dining table. Rayleigh was eating with relish, completely immersed in the delicious food. Grimoire was utterly speechless about this. Rebecca said this meal was her treat, apologizing for her earlier offense. Rayleigh's eyes immediately lit up, readily agreeing. She even told Grimoire through telepathy that she liked this person. She believed someone who treated others to good food couldn't be bad. She even complained the food at the Lich's cave was hard to swallow. Grimoire felt a bit sorry for the Lich. The food he tried so hard to cook was scorned. But compared to food, this murderer before them was the real problem. Rebecca introduced herself at the right time. Her name was Rebecca Duncan. She told Rayleigh to just call her Becky. After the meal, Rayleigh expressed her thanks, but Rebecca smiled brightly. Then she revealed the mark on her hand, explaining in a cheerful tone. It turned out the food here was already free for them. The administrator had already informed them of this rule. Rayleigh's expression instantly froze. Rebecca laughed loudly, teasing that she was much more naive than imagined, and apologized for not intentionally deceiving her. But Grimoire keenly sensed Rayleigh's change. Her current expression showed she was truly angry. As the sky darkened, Rebecca asked about her plans. Rayleigh intended to randomly find a place from the list, but Rebecca enthusiastically stopped her, thinking those places varied in quality. She wanted to recommend the best inn for Rayleigh. She even marked several good places to eat and play on the map. Rayleigh asked if she was going too, but Rebecca said she was staying at a friend's house. Before parting, Rebecca suddenly turned back, her eyes flickering, then excitedly invited Rayleigh to also stay at her friend's house. Rayleigh firmly refused, and Rebecca immediately said with a smile it was a joke. But Grimoire alertly told Rayleigh that was absolutely not a joke. Rayleigh didn't understand why the other was so curious about her. Grimoire speculated perhaps because she passed the exam with junior status. This abnormal strength aroused that lunatic's curiosity. Rebecca said goodbye with a brilliant smile. Who would think beneath this bright smile hid a cruel soul that showed killing intent on first meeting? He reminded Rayleigh there were still things left unsaid before parting. Rayleigh called out to Rebecca, calmly saying goodbye. Then she changed her tone, hoping next time they met she'd attack directly. Don't use illusion magic tricks to scare people again. Rebecca's smile immediately froze. She didn't understand how Rayleigh saw through it. Rayleigh calmly gave her reason, though it was extremely hurtful. She said she could never possibly lose to a poor mage like Rebecca. The word poor completely ignited the mage's pride. Rebecca first got so angry her veins bulged, fists clenched tight. Then, as if hearing a huge joke, she laughed contemptuously. She mocked Rayleigh as just a rookie junior who just started. While she was already at intermediate peak, how could such a vast gap be crossed? Grimoire knew the gap in realms was an iron rule in the magic world, but he knew better that Rayleigh was an exception who excelled at crossing iron rules. She had many times before used experience and strategy to defeat stronger enemies. Rayleigh responded lightly that someone said similar things this afternoon, and that person was now lying in an alley with a hole in their chest. Rebecca still didn't take it seriously, treating it as a brat's arrogance, saying she didn't want to lose qualification again due to private fighting. But Rayleigh pointed out directly she was afraid of failure, so wanted to run away. Rebecca threw down her final words, looking forward to seeing her in the formal exam. She smiled excitedly, marveling she'd met another interesting lunatic this time. Then her figure dissipated like smoke in the air. Rayleigh immediately determined this was just a clone from start to finish. Grimoire confirmed her guess, sighing this clone technique was exquisitely refined. At this point, Rayleigh finally understood the source of Rebecca's curiosity. That lunatic just wanted to see when Rayleigh would discover it was a clone. She enjoyed this dangerous game of walking on the edge of exposure. If it were herself, she'd probably find it interesting too. Hearing this, Grimoire could only sigh helplessly, thinking Rayleigh, who could understand that kind of lunatic, was equally remarkable. The scene shifted. Candlelight flickered as a man carefully reviewed examinee materials. else. The red-haired woman in the crystal ball asked with interest about his progress. The man remarked he saw students he'd taught before, but the woman told him to keep reading, saying the later parts were more interesting. The man turned pages as instructed, then froze before one file. He saw Rayleigh's name with Junior marked after it. The man couldn't help commenting this girl was too arrogant. The woman then had him guess how long this girl took to pass the first stage. The man speculated she probably wandered the city for 3 months, but the woman smiled and denied it, revealing the shocking answer. She said this child had only just arrived this afternoon. The man knew well how astonishing this was. The current fastest record was 4 hours, and that was achieved by a genius using 20 clones to search the entire city. Even the famous high-level mage took a full day. In other words, this girl named Rayleigh was the first place. The man had to admit, this year's examinees were truly full of highlights. There was still a week of rest before the second exam. Rayleigh decided to follow the advice and relax properly, so she started a lazy life of eating then sleeping, sleeping then eating. After 3 straight days, extreme boredom finally consumed her. She crawled out of bed wailing and decided to go out for a walk. At a clothing store, she bought a new outfit that fit perfectly. Even with the considerable expense, the money she brought from her family remained ample. While strolling the streets, a magnificent building caught her eye. Grimoire told her that was the famous Central Library. The hall contained a massive collection of books, especially magic-related texts. Rayleigh immediately felt drawn and proposed going in to look, but Grimoire showed obvious resistance. The library was his shadow. He'd been trapped there with endless books for 300 years, but Rayleigh grabbed him, saying this shadow needed to be overcome sooner or later. In this world, most knowledge could only be obtained from books. He couldn't avoid libraries forever. He had to face it all eventually. Grimoire finally compromised, and rushed in with his eyes closed. Entering the library, Rayleigh was immediately shocked by its interior magnificence. Grimoire also grudgingly admitted the order here was pretty good. Rayleigh checked her credentials, and found she had the highest permissions. This meant she could go to anywhere in the hall. The two exchanged glances, thinking of the same destination in tacit agreement. They excitedly headed toward the secret area that housed forbidden books. Deep in the forbidden book section, they found a faint glimmer of light. Approaching, they saw someone was already sitting there reading. That person turned around at the sound, and both parties froze simultaneously. It was the old man who had met and advised her on the carriage. The old man was very surprised, not understanding why she was here. Rayleigh showed the pass token, proving she'd passed the exam. The old man felt surprised and praised her as remarkable, but Grimoire couldn't help muttering how they'd run into him again. Rayleigh thought her achievement would change the old man's attitude. However, the old man once again urged her to give up the exam. He said the exam was far crueler than imagined. It would become a bloody killing field. Having only talent without experience was too dangerous for her. He seriously suggested she give up this time and come back next time, when better prepared. Rayleigh thanked him again for his advice, but her determination remained unshaken. The old man thought this was just the foolish, hot-bloodedness of youth, but Rayleigh countered, thinking this was admirable courage. Seeing words couldn't persuade her, the old man's eyes suddenly became sharp. Magic power surged around him as he made an unexpected decision. Since he couldn't persuade her, he'd use actual combat to make her face reality. The old man proposed a sparring match to decide her qualification. He promised he absolutely wouldn't attack, and would even let her attack first for 3 moves. As long as she could make him move a step within those 3 moves, it counted as her victory. Grimoire immediately reminded her. This old man was a rare, high-level mage. This was a precious opportunity. Being able to injure him would be enough to prove her strength. But Rayleigh's mind rang with alarms, asking what the cost of failure was. The old man spoke cruel words he would break both her legs, just to prevent her from participating in that potentially fatal selection exam. Grimoire was speechless, thinking this old man was also a crazy guy. Rayleigh felt her self-esteem aching faintly. She even wanted to refuse this concession and demand a duel on equal terms. At this moment, the old man's gaze fell on her backpack. He had her take out that book called 100 Great People. Rayleigh didn't understand why, but the old man skillfully flipped to a certain page. He handed back the book, pointing to one name for her to read carefully. The book recorded a hero who single-handedly repelled hundreds of demons. The emperor appreciated his talent and listed him in the Hall of Fame. And when they saw clearly the faded portrait beside it, the air completely froze. The person in the painting was the old man before them. The book explained that high-level mages were also divided into different types. One type was scholars who studied behind closed doors, the other was battlefield butchers, and among the latter, those standing at the pinnacle were called giants. That name was prominently displayed. Garen Theowalt. Only one thought remained in Rayleigh and Grimoire's minds. They were done for. Their earlier bravado was like a huge joke. She tried to negotiate, making Garen both angry and amused. She looked around, saying the library wasn't a suitable venue. The old man just snapped his fingers. A silent barrier instantly opened. Bookshelves were pushed to corners by magic power, clearing a perfect battlefield in the center. Grimoire encouraged her to try to gauge the gap between them. This was an excellent opportunity to safely assess her own strength. They couldn't possibly fail to land even one effective attack. Garen looked at the girl, making a more complex assessment in his mind. A mage's life had 2 awakenings. Adulthood was the the second. Usually only after adulthood could one grasp attributes and step into low level. If someone reached this realm before adulthood, they were a monster. This girl before him was exactly such a rare monster. Precisely because her talent was so terrifying, he couldn't let her go. He couldn't let a future star of the magic world fall too early. He wanted to use an overwhelming gap to extinguish all her illusions. Garen announced the sparring match had begun, standing still like a mountain. Rayleigh took a deep breath, quickly condensing magic power in her palm. A pure magic missile shot out swiftly as lightning. Garen was slightly surprised. This condensation speed was indeed fast. But that was all. There was no attribute change in the projectile. The magic missile's trajectory was straight, magic power thin. A textbook junior attack. A solid mana shield would be enough to easily block it. As he expected, going to the exam like this meant certain death. However, the next second, Garen's entire body muscles instantly stiffened. A strong sense of paralysis surged through his whole body without warning. It wasn't magic damage, but a kind of fear deep in his bones. He looked at the girl in shock. What had she done? Garen had experienced countless life and death moments and long forgot what fear was. But at this moment, from this novice girl, he actually felt coldness. He instantly realized that was the legendary high-level dispel technique. He immediately deployed a new magic circle behind him to counterattack. A ray of light shot out, ultimately just landing at her feet. Grimoire, watching from the side, saw clearly. This was precise tactics. Garen's heart also stirred with huge waves, beginning to reassess his opponent. Was her earlier frontal assault meant to paralyze him? That confidence wasn't recklessness, but a carefully planned trap. He had to put away all contempt and focus entirely. The second round of attacks suddenly struck, the magic missiles faster. After dodging, Garen raised his shield again, trying to block. However, the magic missile shattered with a crash. His shield actually showed cracks. She precisely hit the most fragile point in his magic structure. This was definitely not a fatal flaw a novice could discover by luck. Extraordinary mana affinity, insight to see weaknesses, profound understanding. All this combined as if a master was secretly guiding her. At her age and experience, she shouldn't possess such techniques. The only explanation was she had outstanding talent that transcended tears. She was a true genius. He sighed and voluntarily moved a step to the side. This meant he acknowledged his defeat, but Rayleigh felt confused, reminding him there was still one last chance. Garen shook his head, thinking victory and defeat were already decided. No need to continue. Garen bowed solemnly, offering a sincere apology for his initial contempt. But Rayleigh said she knew from the start the second attack would succeed. Garen asked in surprise, then why prepare a third attack? A third magic missile was already condensing in Rayleigh's hand. She answered lightly, because the agreement was 3 chances. More importantly, she wanted to use this opportunity to test something. Hearing this, Garen felt an unprecedented impact inside. This third time was just using him as a test target, facing an expert-level mage like him. She was merely experimenting. The third attack was neutralized by Garen. Grimoire sighed. An expert was indeed an expert. He admitted frankly that if her magic power was deeper, he would be in danger. This meant she had top-tier technique but was limited by total magic capacity. Grimoire silently agreed. This analysis hit the nail on the head. Due to not experiencing the second awakening, she could only use basic magic missiles. But making a high-level mage so flustered, she was excellent enough. After leaving the library, Garen hoped she could keep this matter secret. Rayleigh recalled the rule about avoiding conflict before this election and immediately agreed. Garen then asked about her lodging, and she gave the inn's name. Garen froze after hearing it, saying bluntly whoever recommended this place was definitely not a friend. Learning all her luggage was on her, he invited her to a better place. Grimoire initially didn't think much of it, feeling all inns were similar. Until they stood in the resplendent hotel lobby, they were dumbfounded. This was worlds apart from the previous inn. Rayleigh trembled slightly with anger, filled with a sense of betrayal. She had trusted Becky so much, yet she'd stuck her in the worst place. She really wanted to go back immediately and teach that person a harsh lesson. Grimoire reminded her this was also their fault for trusting others too easily. Rayleigh firmly denied it, believing the fault lay entirely with the lying Becky. Grimoire could only suggest getting revenge at tomorrow's selection. Rayleigh's mood immediately improved and she began enjoying the feast before her. Garen asked Rayleigh if she'd already encountered Rebecca. Rayleigh pointed out that person was the killer from the road. Garen revealed an even more disturbing truth. Rebecca had participated in the selection many times, but had her qualification revoked for excessive killing. She'd even killed an administrator. Her infamy was already widespread. She suppressed her bloodlust all year, only fully releasing it during test periods. Grimoire suddenly understood why she'd be called an out-of-control murderer. Rayleigh was confused and communicated with Grimoire through telepathy. If she was so dangerous, why didn't the magic tower ban her completely? Grimoire voiced his guess. They might be using her, treating her as some kind of cleaning tool during tests to achieve hidden purposes. The next day, the magic pattern on their hands guided them. They arrived at a building. The moment they pushed open the door, vast magic power surged out like a tide. Rayleigh felt dizzy, but Grimoire immediately recognized this sensation. This was a sign of a teleportation array activating. They would be sent elsewhere. After the magic power subsided, they found themselves in a magnificent hall. Mages gathered all around, with an ancient throne standing before them. Grimoire recognized this wasn't the current palace, but ancient ruins hiding treasures and knowledge, usually guarded by deadly traps and guardians. a top-level dungeon. Grimoire could hardly believe the test was held in such a dangerous place. At this moment, Rayleigh began searching for Garen, but an unpleasant voice came from behind. Rebecca came over with a big smile, pretending to greet them warmly. She specifically asked if she enjoyed staying at the Sky Whale Inn. Anger surged in Rayleigh's heart, but her surface became even more coldly calm. She deliberately said she didn't go to that inn. Rebecca's smile instantly froze. Rayleigh then claimed she went to the better Stinwood Hotel instead. Grimoire silently cheered, for now they could only use lies to vent. At this moment, the administrators of the 5 great towers appeared. They announced the test would begin soon. Rebecca lowered her voice and viciously threatened Rayleigh. After the test started, she'd settle accounts with Rayleigh first. Rayleigh only responded lightly, saying she very much looked forward to it. The administrator announced the second test would be a 3-person team mission. Teammates would be assigned by management, requiring them to cooperate impromptu. After seeing her teammates clearly, Rebecca's expression completely froze. She and Rayleigh, along with a red-haired girl, were on the same team. The administrator gave them 30 minutes to get familiar with teammates. Rebecca almost collapsed. This arrangement made her furious. Rayleigh smiled cheerfully, saying their confrontation had to be postponed. She complained to Grimoire, yet couldn't hide the smile on her face. Rayleigh admitted making Rebecca angry gave her considerable satisfaction. At this moment, the administrator asked if anyone had other questions. Rebecca immediately raised her hand excitedly. She asked what to do if teammates had conflicts. The administrator answered mechanically. Conflicts were inevitable, but cooperation was the right path. Rebecca pressed on. What if teammates started attacking each other with magic? As soon as these words came out, the entire venue fell silent. The administrator's smile remained unchanged, yet deep and inscrutable. Both Rayleigh and Grimoire felt strong unease rising in their hearts. The administrator finally announced the rule. If one person in the team died, the entire team would be eliminated. Rebecca's face was full of shock and resistance. Then she lost control and roared, questioning what absurd rule this was. Surrounding participants also whispered, complaints rising everywhere. Some thought this was too harsh, others despised teammates who would hold them back. The administrator coldly watched all this, then commanded everyone to be quiet. She pointed out mercilessly that mages had long been pampered by society. Just because they possessed power, even rude behavior went unchallenged. Over decades, many had become arrogant and socially incompetent, and the magic towers needed comrades who could fight together, not lone wolves. This second team test was precisely to filter out such people. Rebecca's chest heaved violently as she swallowed back her curses. Finally, she screamed in frustration, before extremely reluctantly shaking hands with Rayleigh. Grimoire saw her strong desire to participate, but Rayleigh inwardly suspected this compliance was just another mask. At this moment, the red-braided teammate timidly greeted them from afar, standing far away with a small voice. Rebecca couldn't help but sarcastically say she couldn't hear it all. The girl blushed and approached, stammering through her self-introduction. Her name was Olivia, from the Flame Academy, famous for ancient magic. These words were like igniting a powder keg. Rebecca instantly collapsed in rage. She roared, accusing the team of having a useless failure mixed in. Rayleigh asked in confusion why ancient magic was so despised. Grimoire explained with sarcasm. Ancient magic was like outdated fairy tales, garbage that only romantic fools who believed in moving mountains and filling seas would study. Grimoire helplessly took stock of the team members. Rebecca, an illusionist with volatile moods who might kill people. Olivia, an antisocial person obsessed with useless ancient magic. Plus Rayleigh. This was simply the worst combination of the year. At this moment, Garen came over, asking with concern if Rayleigh was adapting. Rayleigh responded politely and asked in return how his team situation was. Garen seemed quite satisfied. This made Grimoire feel jealous. At this moment, Rebecca's cursing came over. Garen frowned knowingly. He said having Rebecca and an ancient mage was uncertain fortune or misfortune. Grimoire agreed inwardly. Rebecca had ability but easily lost control or betrayed, while Olivia's ancient magic had absolutely no practical combat value. This meant the real combat power was only Rayleigh and the unreliable Rebecca. Rayleigh felt the road ahead was difficult. Grimoire forced himself to rally, saying there was no way back now. He reminded Rayleigh other teams necessarily had the same complaints. Everyone was complaining about how terrible their teammates were. Overcoming this mentality, discovering teammates' strengths and working together. This was exactly what this team test wanted to teach everyone. Although cooperating with these two would definitely not be easy. Garen said goodbye and left. Rayleigh looked at his retreating back and suddenly froze. She suddenly realized former friends were now opponents. Grimoire sensed her emotions and spoke to comfort her not to worry. The past half year of rigorous training was definitely not in vain. He believed in her ability. He was certain this test would become a key step toward achieving their goal. The 30-minute preparation time ended, and the administrator gathered everyone again. She pointed to the entrance, announcing the second test would begin soon. The test would take place in the ancient ruins labyrinth. The goal was to find hidden treasure. Under the spell's activation, a crystal ball projected a strange golden figure. Rebecca immediately recognized it as a dangerous golden golem. The administrator added to the rules, the test must be completed within 24 hours, and 2 cruel conditions must be met to pass. First, at the end of the test, they must obtain the golem's core. Second, Every member of the team must survive. Grimoire analyzed silently. It sounded like they just needed to be careful of traps. Many mages also breathed a sigh of relief, thinking this was simpler than expected. But the administrator reminded them there were only 3 golden golems total, while there were 14 participating teams. The pass rate was lowered to a chilling 20%. Grimoire instantly understood this wasn't simply treasure hunting. The organizers wanted to watch them kill each other over limited resources. The administrator's voice rang out again, mentioning the greatest danger source. That was the extremely dangerous monster, the Chimera. Grimoire felt that description was oddly familiar, until the administrator mentioned the Lich incident that invaded the Empire 5 years ago. Grimoire froze completely. These monsters actually came from the Lich. Recalling that damn skeleton head, he burned with anger. Never thought he, as the Lich's teacher, had become an accomplice to evil. At this moment, the administrator announced the test officially began. Through the door, they would be randomly teleported to some corner of the ruins. Grimoire followed Rayleigh into the dungeon. Everything here was unreasonably gigantic. Suddenly, violent tremors came from underfoot, as if the earth was awakening. A giant foot wrapped in chains appeared before them. Everyone looked up, seeing a fully armored giant stone soldier walk past. This was probably the so-called challenge. Based on experience, Grimoire believed they shouldn't fight this thing, and there shouldn't be any lunatic interested in such a profitless battle. But Rebecca's excited shout immediately shattered this hope. Her eyes shining, she proposed attacking that monster right now. Rayleigh immediately grabbed Rebecca's arm. Rebecca struggled violently, questioning why they should miss this perfect opportunity. She craved the thrill of battling powerful enemies, thinking it was romantic. Hearing this, Grimoire was completely speechless, unable to understand her logic at all. Rayleigh tried to dissuade her, saying even if they won, there'd be no gain. But Rebecca said romance itself was the greatest gain. Grimoire and Rayleigh thought this kind of weirdo was just an exception, but another team's wild roar instantly shattered their fantasy. That group of mages saw the stone soldier and also excitedly wanted to fight. Seeing this, Rebecca became more anxious, afraid others would steal her fun, just as Rayleigh struggled to restrain her. The mages over there had already attacked. A huge magic orb bombarded the statue, but was tanked with its face. Before the mages recovered from shock, a giant foot already descended like blocking out the sky. Blood splattered the next second, staining the ancient ground red. The surviving teammates screamed and began fleeing in all directions. The stone soldier slowly raised its guillotine-like greatsword. The swordlight fell, and fleeing figures and screams both stopped abruptly. Rayleigh and Olivia tightly hugged the stunned Rebecca. Rebecca's forehead dripped with cold sweat as she changed her tune, saying they should find the golden golem first. Rayleigh tried to condense magic power, but felt a strong sense of obstruction. Grimoire explained these ancient ruins were very dangerous. This place was full of ancient interference and restrictions, perception severely suppressed, layer upon layer of lost spells. Breaking through them would be extremely troublesome. In this environment, ordinary pathfinding magic couldn't possibly work, but he still believed in Rayleigh, asking how long she needed to complete the mapping. Rayleigh's expression was calm, confidently giving an answer of less than 5 minutes. For her, restricting magic power was like covering one eye, but not complete blindness. Grimoire felt relieved. Anyone here would be irritable and uneasy. Only Rayleigh could maintain her usual calm, completely different from someone else. At this moment, Rebecca was raging due to magic power frustration. She irritably sought ideas from Olivia, asking how to find the target. Olivia timidly said her ancient magic couldn't do anything. This answer made Rebecca even more dissatisfied, scolding her as utterly useless. In her anger, Rebecca actually ordered Olivia to raise her hand and hit herself on the head, and the scene of Olivia crying while complying left Grimoire dumbfounded. At this moment, Olivia quietly suggested they could use Rebecca's clones to scout. Grimoire recalled the intel mentioning 20 clones and thought it feasible, but Rebecca's face showed a troubled expression. She created a few clones, then gave an explanation. The premise for clones sharing vision was, they must be alive. In these trap-filled ruins, clones were extremely prone to mishaps. Controlling many clones was already extremely taxing, not to mention simultaneously dealing with attacks. Once all clones were destroyed, her magic power would also be exhausted, unable to fight. After listening, Olivia could only guiltily lower her head again. Rebecca irritably turned to Rayleigh, wanting to see what she was doing. Before finishing her words, Rayleigh announced everything was complete. As light flashed, an intricate and complex path map appeared before them. They asked in shock what this was. Rayleigh answered it was path searching. Rebecca couldn't believe it. This was completely different from the form she knew. Seeing Rayleigh's improved results, Grimoire felt proud. Rayleigh confidently named it Rayleigh's super mega arc path search. Grimoire immediately vetoed her naming idea. Everyone followed the route Rayleigh marked. She suddenly called out to stop. The next second, several arrows grazed past them and embedded in the wall. Rayleigh calmly pointed out there was an arrow trap there. Along the way, she led everyone to avoid dozens of deadly mechanisms in succession. Rebecca couldn't help asking why she was so good at dealing with traps. Grimoire silently praised. This was a perfect combination of talent and experience. Precisely because of her, the team saved a large amount of magic power for defense. Olivia's scream interrupted their thoughts. Before them was a miserable scene, broken bodies scattered everywhere. Rebecca analyzed the wounds, judging them to be from canine monsters. These people exhausted their magic power in traps and finally had no strength to resist. resist. She turned to look at Rayleigh, rarely acknowledging her contribution, but Rayleigh directly demanded she say thanks. She didn't want to thank her, questioning why Rayleigh was so aggressive. The two brought up old grievances, Rebecca even excitedly demanding a fight. Olivia's trembling voice inserted, pleading with them to respect the dead. She looked at the bodies with pity, wanting to step forward to close their eyes. Rebecca hastily stopped her, accusing her of meddling and having no common sense. The oily mucus attached to the bodies was the hound monster's saliva. The monster's sense of smell was extremely keen. Touching the traces would expose everyone's location. Only then did Olivia apologize fearfully, her face pale. Rebecca told her to remember this lesson. In dungeons, they must always be vigilant. But Rayleigh pointed out Rebecca just wanted to fight the giant. Rebecca argued that was completely different. Fighting powerful enemies was romantic. While talking, other mages' figures suddenly appeared ahead. Both sides instantly entered confrontation, Rebecca excited for the first battle. But Olivia felt uneasy again. The next second, an incident occurred. The opposing mages were ambushed. The devoured mage let out a piercing scream. The surviving teammates were scared out of their wits, frozen in place. That invisible monster finally slowly revealed its hideous form. Olivia covered her mouth in fright, almost crying. They quickly hid, holding their breath, waiting for the monster to leave on its own. Grimoire felt nauseated, thinking the test was too cruel. Unexpectedly, Olivia couldn't hold it in first and actually started dry heaving. Rayleigh pointed out calmly through telepathy that someone had vomited first. Grimoire suddenly asked her if she wanted to fight this chimera. That monster was feasting heartily, the scene bloody and terrifying. Rayleigh observed silently, assessing her own abilities inside. She found the more the monster ate, the stronger it became. Grimoire smiled, encouraging her it was time to get some exercise. A trace of fighting spirit surged in Rayleigh's heart. She walked out first, then turned back and issued an invitation to the eager Rebecca. Rebecca immediately got excited, her eyes flashing with warlike light. The two walked out of cover together, directly facing that ferocious chimera. The chimera immediately noticed them, condensing magic power in its mouth. A powerfully destructive magic orb rapidly bombarded toward Rayleigh. Rayleigh's expression didn't change. She raised her hand and cast a spell. The attack was easily neutralized, and the chimera roared in frustration. But Rayleigh inexplicably felt a trace of inappropriate pity in her heart. She thought even monsters should enjoy a moment of peace while eating. Rebecca flashed behind the monster, praising Rayleigh for doing well, but immediately emphasized this was still far from her level. The chimera angrily turned, its bloody maw biting toward Rebecca. Rebecca leapt up as gracefully as dancing, landing on its head. While dodging, she mocked the monster with childish words. Rayleigh was helpless at her childlike personality. She had lost patience, condensing a magic missile in her hand. She asked Rebecca if they should quickly end this battle. Rebecca also gathered light in her hand, smiling in agreement. Both attacked simultaneously, magic missiles tracing deadly trajectories. Light pierced through the chimera's body, forming a cross. The battle ended, but Olivia hid in a corner muttering to herself. Even when Rebecca called her, she didn't respond, making her instantly furious. Just as Rebecca was about to explode again, Grimoire covered Rayleigh's ears. He smiled bitterly, saying this might be Rebecca's unique way of showing concern. Rayleigh also realized Rebecca wasn't a mindless berserker. At least she didn't take pleasure in killing, but had her own strange principles. This made them feel a bit troubled, because this differed from Garen's warning. If Garen's words couldn't be fully trusted, then the truth became even more confusing. But the priority now was still passing the test before them. At this moment, Olivia finally completed her long prayer. Rebecca completely couldn't understand why bother when people were already dead. Olivia began rambling on explaining ancient magical traditions. Grimoire summarized. All this was stale content from ancient magic. At this moment, Rayleigh suddenly thought of a key question. She turned to Olivia, her gaze filled with deep confusion. She recalled Olivia saying she couldn't use ancient magic for directions. If she couldn't find the way, then how exactly did she pass the first test? Everyone looked at Olivia filled with doubt, a person who couldn't even find the way. How exactly did she pass the first test? Olivia stammered, eyes evasive, clearly hiding a secret. Finally, she confessed she hadn't personally searched for that office, but commissioned the Mage Guild skilled in pathfinding to do it. She claimed she was a peerless genius researching ancient magic theory. Entering the 5 great towers was destined. They should even be begging her. But reality was she was stuck in the academy, completely unable to find her way, until she met a mage who just passed the application, and she approached for help. But they not only refused but humiliated her. In her view, this was simply incomprehensible. She was so polite. Grimoire thought any normal person would make the same choice. Olivia's voice lowered, revealing a trace of guilt. She said she had no choice and used an ancient spell. That was exactly her specialty, torture-type curses. Eventually, that mage compromised under painful torment. After listening, Rebecca first stared in disbelief, then burst into uncontrollable laughter, rolling on the ground. Someone who passed through torture curses was lecturing about respecting the dead? This extreme contradiction made her cry with laughter. Grimoire and Rayleigh exchanged glances, filled with helplessness inside. Why weren't any of their teammates normal? After adjusting, the team continued forward. 12 hours had passed since the test began. The core remained nowhere to be found. The legendary golden golems were good at concealment and would actively flee. Even if they could sense its presence, they couldn't easily capture it. Rebecca was somewhat discouraged, sighing the mission was far harder than imagined. But Rayleigh suddenly focused, carefully observing the map. She said 2 stationary golem reactions appeared nearby. At the same time, Arpel extracted the brilliant core from the golem's remains. He breathed a sigh of relief, yet knew in his heart this all relied on Garen's ability. Facing this living legend, he had only deep admiration and awe. He suggested the team should rest temporarily. After all, the goal was achieved. But Garen refused, and asked Arpel in return if he felt anything unusual. Then he took that core, carefully examining the magic power within. He pointed out this magic power was powerful and peculiar, should be specially made by the tower. But strangely, such vigorous power couldn't be sensed before. Arpel, as a high-level mage, also realized the contradiction. Garen revealed the first trick, having him examine the golem's outer skin. Arpel was shocked to discover it was actually enchanted rare dragon skin. Dragon skin had extremely strong resistance to tracking spells, perfectly hiding the core. Garon then raised the second question, his tone meaningful. Now that the core was exposed, magic power no longer concealed, what would happen? Arpel hadn't figured it out yet when Garen gave the cold answer. He said the test's real goal was never finding the core. Before he finished speaking, other mages' figures gradually emerged from all directions. They were all attracted by this suddenly exposed powerful magic power. Arpel instantly understood. This was the 5 Great Towers' cruel design. The first team to find the core would immediately become a target for all. What the towers wanted to observe was the team's reaction and choices under crisis. However, another deeper doubt seized Arpel. Since Garen had already seen through everything, why still extract the core early? Garen turned his head, a crazed smile slowly blooming on his face. He said calmly he wanted to use this opportunity to catch them all in one net. The mages shouted and launched a joint attack, targeting Garen directly, but Garen didn't move an inch. When the attack approached, his wand erupted with astonishing magic power. Those who rushed forward first were struck as if by a heavy blow, instantly dropping to their knees as if suffocating. Subsequent attackers were lifted by invisible forces and thrown into the air. Teammates watched dumbfounded, letting out sincere admiration, but Garen only calmly instructed the two to prepare to work together. Working together, dealing with 10 weaklings was nothing at all. At the same time, Rebecca keenly sensed the core's magic power. She excitedly urged her teammates to rush over and compete for it immediately, but Rayleigh coldly refused, believing going now was definitely not wise. Rebecca retorted excitedly, worried going late would leave them with nothing. Rayleigh pointed out they weren't the only team who could think of this plan. When everyone gathered for a melee, the scene would only get completely out of control. She proposed a bolder idea, to search for another core. Though Rebecca was unwilling, she couldn't refute Rayleigh's judgment either. She finally compromised and did as Rayleigh said. They all understood Rayleigh's pathfinding ability was extraordinary. Unless one had extremely high magic power, they could only rely on luck to find targets. Just then, the originally hidden core suddenly burst with intense light. Vast magic power swept out like the brightest lighthouse in the dark night. Almost all competitors were attracted, frantically surging toward it. Chaotic fighting and explosion sounds came from the distance. The scene was fierce, but Rayleigh grew suspicious. This magic power eruption was too coincidental. She suspected someone deliberately set this as a trap and bait. The purpose was to make competitors kill each other and reduce numbers. Grimoire thought this idea was absurd, telling her to focus on finding the last golden golem. They continued searching according to plan. Listening to the distant commotion, Rebecca's battle impulse was hard to suppress. To divert attention, she suddenly turned to ask Olivia, asking why among all magic. She chose the most obscure ancient magic. Olivia was caught off guard and began stammering again. Rayleigh interjected, saying Rebecca's clone technique was also a minority school. Rebecca retorted, claiming she at least mastered basic magic, while Olivia seemed to live completely in another ancient world. Then she softened her tone, saying this was just out of curiosity. She wanted to know the real reason for choosing this difficult path. Olivia finally quietly spoke of her childhood longing. She thought the forgotten great wizards in fairy tales were incredibly cool. After hearing this, Rebecca's eyes flashed with obvious disappointment. She sighed that those stories of moving mountains and overturning seas were just fairy tales. Even if the greatest witch was reborn, it would be absolutely impossible. Olivia eagerly defended, saying it wasn't just stories. But Rebecca asked in return, if it truly existed, why could no one use it? Why was ancient magic still despised and mocked by everyone to this day? Olivia was at a loss for words, only able to mutter they still needed time. Rebecca's tone became serious and worried. She urged Olivia to face reality, not to waste precious talent. She even mentioned her own past obsession with illusion magic. Before finishing, she sadly closed her mouth and sighed deeply. She finally added this was all for her own good. Olivia could only nod silently and quietly thank her. Rayleigh, walking ahead, heard all this. She couldn't help asking Grimoire whether that fairy tale-like magic was real or not. Which of them was right? Grimoire was silent for a moment before giving a definite answer. He said Olivia was right. It wasn't fairy tales. Moving mountains, splitting seas, annihilating thousands, all were real history. That was the immortal legend he created with his disciples. Rayleigh was filled with confusion. If this was the truth, why would people forget? He explained this was closely related to historical changes. In the distant past, the era of endless war finally came to an end. A powerful Lich King unified the continent and established the Ritaz Empire. He declared peace had arrived, and war mages instantly lost their purpose. Destructive magic was no longer needed. The Empire sent them to laboratories, turning to civilian magic engineering research. Repairing and exploring dungeons left from war became the primary task. They needed to develop efficient new magic to deal with these challenges. However, explosive spells could eliminate monsters, but also brought disaster. One out-of-control use in a dungeon led to the ceiling's complete collapse, burying many alive. Among them was one of his personal disciples. Rayleigh fell silent, feeling the cruel cost of that history. After that, magic's development direction was completely reversed. The modern magic system pursuing safety, precision, and efficiency became mainstream, while powerful ancient magic was gradually abandoned. When the empire stabilized and later generations renewed interest, it was too late. Legends became fairy tales and were eventually seen as fantasy. Rayleigh couldn't help but press on. Did he himself still remember how to use it? Grimoire seemed listless. Remembering was useless with no place to apply it. But Rayleigh firmly proposed. She was willing to learn ancient magic. Grimoire immediately rejected this naive and dangerous idea. Ancient magic was far from simple. It required complete study from scratch. This would mean she must give up all magical achievements accumulated so far, including her greatest advantage, that outstanding mana affinity. After listening, Rayleigh decisively dismissed this impractical idea. At this moment, they discovered mages ahead. They had just captured a golden golem. Everyone looked utterly exhausted, obviously having gone through a tough battle. Rebecca felt delighted. The target finally appeared before them. But Rayleigh immediately noticed. They were only restraining the golem, not extracting the core. The golem let out a low growl, and the mages immediately cast spells to soothe it. Grimoire also thought this behavior was somewhat abnormal, until he discovered the special material covering the golem's body. That was dragon skin, precious material that could isolate the core's magic fluctuations. Not extracting the core was to hide its existence and location. Grimoire immediately reminded Rayleigh, this team was definitely not simple. But Rebecca suddenly jumped out. For her, battling strong opponents was just routine. She walked out in a high-profile manner, demanding they hand over the golem core. Those three mages alertly stood up, assuming defensive postures. Rebecca condensed a dazzling magic orb in her hand, laughing wildly as she built up power. Just as battle was about to break out, an accident suddenly occurred. The lead mage actually dropped to his knees with a thud, shouting surrender. Rebecca was instantly stunned. This completely exceeded her expectations. His teammates were also shocked, completely unable to understand the captain's behavior. But the captain turned back and sternly ordered them to kneel down immediately too. All three knelt in unison. The scene became incredibly ridiculous yet eerie. Rebecca was very confused. Why surrender directly when they clearly weren't weak? Rayleigh guessed perhaps it was Rebecca's own fierce reputation. However, that captain's trembling plea revealed the real reason. He wasn't pleading to Rebecca but begging Olivia for forgiveness. He cried out, willing to hand over the core. Just please don't use the torture curse again. Olivia's face instantly became embarrassed as she quietly explained to her companions. This was the one who helped her pass the first round of tests. They couldn't imagine just how terrifying Olivia's torture curse was. Not long after, the golden golem slept peacefully in Rayleigh's arms. A trace of softness rose in her heart as she decided to name it Toby. Rebecca was deceived by its cute appearance and reached out to pet it. The next second, Toby bit her. A tooth mark clearly remained on her fingertip. Rayleigh sighed helplessly. This team was always full of unexpected chaos, but fortunately they obtained the core without experiencing battle. Rebecca rarely praised Olivia, then asked why she didn't continue using this magic. The answer was speechless. That curse actually had a 1-month cooldown. They couldn't help but complain about ancient magic's uselessness. Rebecca also noticed Olivia's accent, guessing she was from the South. Olivia admitted with surprise, curious how she knew. Grimoire interjected, saying bluntly the South indeed produced strange people. Rayleigh immediately criticized this as outright regional discrimination. Grimoire excitedly retorted this was observational fact from tens of thousands of years. Rayleigh shook her head in disappointment, thinking his remarks were biased, but then heard Rebecca excitedly announce she was also from the South. Hearing this, Olivia was delighted. The two instantly felt close. At this moment, Rayleigh repeated the discriminatory remarks to Grimoire, while acting completely innocent, not admitting her double standards. Grimoire mocked her for definitely loving to read Pinocchio as a child. Rayleigh said she read stories like Jack the Thief. Grimoire said he'd never heard of it. Rayleigh's eyes dimmed. She quietly explained it was a book Uncle Robert specially wrote for her. Thinking of that resolute figure in the flames, her heart ached slightly. She told Grimoire that Uncle taught her selfishness and distrust. Grimoire suddenly understood. No wonder she grew into such a strange personality. With only 4 hours remaining until the end, everyone was tired. Rayleigh studied the map. Not seeing opponents approach, she also felt drowsy. Grimoire reminded her to persist. Victory was right ahead. Just then, a wave of magic suddenly stabbed over. Rayleigh instantly woke up, constructing a defensive barrier at the fastest speed. The attack came without warning. Her detection ability hadn't issued a warning. Rebecca and Olivia were also awakened, feeling incredulous. Rebecca questioned Rayleigh why she didn't discover the enemy's approach. Rayleigh herself was also confused and puzzled. Grimoire knew well her perception ability. Unless the opponent was covered in dragon skin, it was impossible not to sense them. Before he finished speaking, the attacker appeared, indeed covered in dragon skin. At this moment, Rayleigh had a question. The opponent already had dragon skin. Then why still come to rob their core? Grimoire also felt uneasy. The opponent's danger far exceeded estimates. What made Rayleigh's heart tremble more was that magic fluctuation was abnormally familiar. Magic power was like an instrument, leaving the user's unique wavelength and traces. And what the person before them emanated was a deep, sinister aura of death. A voice rang out, saying it had been a long time. Rayleigh steadied her mind, responding to this unexpected reunion method. The other removed their hood. It was indeed Garon. Rayleigh questioned if he came to seize the core. Garon shook his head, saying he'd already already obtained the needed core. Rayleigh was even more confused. If so, why attack? Garen slowly spoke, revealing his only purpose for participating in the test. That was to kill Rebecca Duncan. Garen stated bluntly he held deep personal grudges against Rebecca. He couldn't let this shameless murderer continue harming people. Unfortunately, the exam rule was one person's death meant the whole team was out. Rayleigh immediately realized if Rebecca died, she too would lose everything. Garen apologized for this, his killing intent not diminished at all. Rebecca walked forward with a cold laugh, accepting this deadly challenge. Grimoire stopped Rayleigh from stepping forward, analyzing the gap in both sides' abilities. Rayleigh excelled at missiles and dispel, attacking opponents' weaknesses, while Garen's magic was renowned for absolute defense with almost no flaws. He was the trickiest opponent type they could encounter, but Rebecca's eyes instead burned with excitement. She always loved dueling strong opponents. The perfect opponent was right before her. How could she have any reason not to fight? Garen's face was livid, saying no more, only seriously instructing his two teammates, warning them the mages they faced were definitely not simple. They must be careful. But Dorothy didn't take it seriously, thinking one opponent was an ancient fool. The other even seemed like a novice. She completely didn't understand what there was to fear. Garen sternly corrected her underestimation, having Arpel make sure to watch Dorothy. Shadows on the ground surged. Dark magic instantly swallowed everyone. Light and shadow shifted. When they opened their eyes again, the battlefield had been forcibly divided. In the empty space, only Garen and Rebecca remained facing each other from afar. Rebecca curtsied elegantly, yet her tone carried a trace of cold mockery, though they were meeting for the first time. She'd already heard too many stories about him from Sharon. Hearing his granddaughter's name, the string of Garen's reasons suddenly snapped. He growled not to let her filthy mouth mention Sharon, but Sharon's appearance before death surfaced before Rebecca's eyes. That image burned her soul day and night, becoming fuel for killing. At the same time, Rayleigh was teleported to a new place. This was a huge greenhouse. Grimoire quickly observed, finding Olivia already cowering in a corner, muttering to herself. Fortunately, the golden golem was also there. This made them feel slightly relieved, but Grimoire immediately grew suspicious. Why did the opponent go to such great lengths? Shadow teleportation was extremely draining. Using it just to divide the battlefield was too risky. There must be mechanisms hidden here that could give them an advantage. Dense plants blocked vision and interfered with energy tracking. This was definitely not a typical fair battlefield, but a carefully selected hunting ground, just as they analyzed. Dorothy and Arpel emerged from the shadows. Dorothy was still complaining, thinking Garen missed the best ambush opportunity, while dismissing Olivia and Rayleigh with contempt. One coward, one novice child, nothing to fear at all. She mocked Rayleigh for being unable to fight two at once. For Rayleigh, this was a race against time. Rayleigh had to break through these two's blockade before Rebecca fell. She asked Grimoire if she had a chance of winning. Grimoire responded heavily. Hope was slim. Both opponents were high-level mages. The other side had lost patience and began attacking. The ground suddenly cracked, thick, hideous vines bursting from the earth. Man-eating flowers opened their fang-filled, bloody maws. Rayleigh instantly understood why they were teleported here. Arpel was a high-level earth mage who controlled plants. He said he inherited the visual magic of Grand Wizard Crombell. Rayleigh's heart shook. That name was very familiar to her. A shadow magic had already crept to her feet. She jumped away dangerously. Then, man-eating flower vines swept over again. From all directions, enemies everywhere, she fell into a carefully laid killing formation. Dorothy sighed, saying battling low-level mages damaged self-esteem. She advised Rayleigh to give up. After all, there would be many more opportunities in the future. Grimoire calmly analyzed the battle situation. Man-eating plants combined with shadow magic was indeed a tricky combination. Rayleigh asked if she had a chance of winning. Grimoire admitted facing two high-level mages alone was extremely disadvantageous, but he then smiled lightly, changing his tone. He said if one understood both the enemy and oneself, there was no need to fear. He asked Rayleigh which one she thought should be dealt with first. Rayleigh decisively chose Arpel, who controlled plants. As long as the plants disappeared, shadow magic would also lose its foundation. Grimoire felt relieved, praising her judgment as correct. Then, with a trace of pride, he raised another question. That Grand Wizard Crombell who created plant magic, who was his teacher? Rayleigh immediately recalled the 5 talented disciples he'd mentioned. She said without hesitation, "It's you." Grimoire smiled, recalling a conversation from long ago. He once asked young Crombell what he truly liked. The other held a potted plant, shyly saying he liked caring for them. Precisely because of this understanding, Grimoire was now full of confidence, seeing the smile at the corner of Rayleigh's mouth. Dorothy thought she had already yielded. She urged Rayleigh to make the final choice. Fight or surrender. But Rayleigh told Grimoire a fairy tale in her heart. It was one uncle from the guild made up for her, about the con artist Amy. She would now demonstrate the deception she learned from it. Then she pointed to the golden golem beside her, saying they no longer needed this thing. Both Dorothy and Arpel were stunned. This turn was unexpected. But seeing Rayleigh's sad expression, Dorothy believed it was true. She happily accepted, crouching down to summon the golem over. Grimoire asked curiously what this scam was exactly. Rayleigh explained people often let their guard down around the weak. She would exploit precisely this psychology. Just as the golem approached and Dorothy reached out to touch it, Rayleigh suddenly gave a quiet order, "Toby, bite her." The golem suddenly pounced, fangs deeply embedded in Dorothy's hand. Blood gushed out as Arpel shouted in panic. panic. Taking advantage of this chaos, the magic orb Rayleigh condensed shot out rapidly. The orb rushed straight toward Dorothy's face so fast only an afterimage remained. Arpel immediately raised a shield, barely blocking this strike. Grimoire commented the opponent obviously underestimated her power. Both their faces indeed showed incredible surprise. Rayleigh didn't pause, immediately casting Dispel Magic. Arpel's shield shattered in response. The two dodged in disarray. Dorothy covered her hand, trembling all over from pain and anger. She accused Rayleigh of cheating. Rayleigh mocked this wasn't a knight's duel. She clearly declared they gave her two choices. She chose to fight, and moreover, she would definitely win. In the corner, Olivia still prayed silently. Rayleigh held her head high, issuing a duel invitation to her opponents. Meanwhile, on another battlefield, the atmosphere was equally tense. Garen sternly stopped Rebecca from mentioning his granddaughter's name, but Rebecca didn't care, the corner of her mouth carrying a cold smile. She looked directly at Garen, her eyes burning with resolute hatred. She said word by word she would avenge Sharon. The selection test 2 years ago was the beginning of all Rebecca's hatred. She rushed across the yellow line first, excitedly turning back to find her best friend, but found Sharon far behind, being closely pursued by a giant statue. Rebecca was horrified, not understanding why she was the one in danger. The administrator beside her let out a harsh and cold mocking laugh. People around seemed unable to hear the cries for help and also laughed along. She could only watch helplessly as the statue mercilessly crushed toward Sharon. Warm blood splattered on her cheek. After the shock, towering rage completely consumed her. At this moment, she told Garen those people could have saved her, but they mocked Sharon, so she killed them. This was revenge. Garen accused her of beautifying murder as revenge, sullying his granddaughter's honor. 2 years ago, an administrator mysteriously died. 1 year ago, multiple veteran mages died in succession. From that time on, Rebecca became a murderer people feared. Garen condemned her actions as having no benefit to Sharon's reputation. Therefore today, he would personally end all this, only to restore his granddaughter's honor that was contaminated by the murderer. Hearing this, Rebecca laughed, the laughter full of sarcasm. She questioned whether he only cared about that ridiculous honor in his heart. His only granddaughter died, yet he cared about the family's face. Garen withdrew his hand, his tone carrying confusion. He'd always been curious how someone like her could be his granddaughter's friend. Rebecca also laughed, asking in return how pure Sharon could have such a relative. She provocatively called him old man, complaining he talked too much, proposing mages should communicate with magic. Wasn't this what he always taught Sharon? Garen finally restrained all emotions. Magic power around began to riot. He issued a final warning, don't let her mention his granddaughter's name again. Rebecca deliberately recited that name word by word. That was her best friend and his only granddaughter. Garen's anger reached its peak as violent magic instantly released. Wind elements transformed into a destructive storm, blasting surrounding walls to pieces. A huge rock viciously smashed into Rebecca's face, yet her body dissipated like a phantom. Garen discovered irritably it was only a clone. He cast magic again. A precise beam of light shuttled and searched through the ruins. He thought he'd locked onto her true body as light shot forth, but this time the Rebecca found still slowly dissolved into a phantom. Garen's heart rang with alarm, because a cold short sword had already stabbed from behind him. The thought of defense flashed through his mind, but everything was too late. The blade infused with magic power penetrated his throat without obstruction. Rebecca smiled and pulled out the short sword, blood gushing out with it. Garen clutched his wound tightly, filled with confusion inside. How exactly did she find and approach him so quickly? His sense of time began to slow, the entire world spinning. This feeling he'd experienced countless times on the battlefield. This was a harbinger of death descending. However, the next second, his consciousness was violently pulled back to reality. Rebecca stood intact before him. Her tone carried obvious disappointment, complaining Garen's speed of breaking free from illusion was even slower than Rayleigh's. Then she mockingly asked a cruel question, asking if he just saw the moment of his own death. Garen's heart pounded wildly. That phantom of defeat was too real, almost suffocating him. He could only forcibly compose himself and straighten his collar. Retorting this method was despicable, but Rebecca laughed, saying, compared to his trap, this was nothing. She'd long seen through that the battlefield itself was bait. He deliberately let core energy leak, just to draw her out. Garen was silent for a moment before finally admitting this darkly. He knew well no mage was as battle-crazed as her. Rebecca admitted she originally wanted to accept the invitation, but was stopped by Rayleigh. Hearing this, Garen violently raised his staff, pointing directly at her throat. Since she didn't fall for it, he'd personally come to end all this. Rebecca didn't dodge or evade, but instead patted the staff, then revealed a nearly crazed, mocking smile, asking if he'd already killed dozens of people for her sake. At this moment, why pretend to be righteous? Wasn't this self-contradictory? Garen was choked speechless. He forcibly claimed he saw her death in the illusion just now. Now he would turn this phantom into reality. But Rebecca suddenly fell into reminiscence, recalling her mother's words. Herb gatherers often fall off cliffs, swordsmen ultimately die by the sword, alchemists perish from forbidden potions they concoct themselves, and mages should rightfully end while casting magic. Her mother's dying wish was for her to fall as a mage. Rebecca's eyes burned with fervent and pure fighting spirit. She longed to witness firsthand the death he prophesied. Thus her 27 years as a mage would be complete. The duel officially began at this moment. On the other side, Rayleigh's one taunt completely ignited the battle. Dorothy trembled all over with rage, reason instantly shattering. unable to tolerate a beginner so despising them. Violent magic power erupted thunderously. Grimoire secretly shook his head. Emotion made magic full of flaws. Rayleigh dodged gracefully. The attack didn't even touch her hem. Arpel tried to get Dorothy to calm down quickly. Grimoire observed the battle situation. He'd already seen the dawn of victory in his heart. Man-eating flowers and shadow vines attacked in coordination, the offensive seemingly fierce. Yet Rayleigh shuttled through crisis, dodging with ease. Dorothy's face grew paler from injury and consumption. The speed of attacks was visibly slowing. Grimoire saw she was already physically and mentally exhausted, at the end of her rope. Continuing like this, their victory was certain. But Rayleigh was anxious. She was eager to go support Rebecca. Grimoire immediately guided, cut the connection between mage and summoned creatures. Rayleigh understood. The tip of her foot lightly touched a vine, borrowing the force to leap into the air. Both Dorothy and Arpel were stunned, not expecting her to charge in reverse. Using path searching, her figure flickered like a ghost. The goal was extremely clear, directly targeting the mage themselves. The most direct way to cut the connection was attacking the caster. The next second, her fist already smashed toward Arpel's face. Arpel and Dorothy fell in succession. The battle came to an abrupt halt. Rayleigh panted, fatigue from excessive concentration beginning to emerge. Grimoire asked with concern about her condition. At this moment, continuous low murmuring from the corner caught their attention. Olivia remained huddled in the shadows, chanting incantations. She only had minor scrapes, having preserved herself during the melee. A faint whimpering sound drew their gaze to the other side. The golden golem curled up trembling, its torso pierced with a large hole by plants. That glowing core was already exposed. Rayleigh reached out to extract it. The golem became completely still thereafter. Only one thought remained in her mind. She must go help Rebecca now. She urgently activated pathfinding magic, trying to lock onto Rebecca's position. However, the feedback result made her feel like plunging into an ice pit instantly. She couldn't sense Rebecca's energy, not a trace at all. A cold voice rang out from behind, announcing the outcome. Garen slowly approached, informing them of Rebecca Duncan's death. Rayleigh refused to believe it. How could that just clear presence disappear? But Grimoire could only barely sense a trace of faint remnant. The rule of one death eliminating the entire team echoed in Rayleigh's mind. A full year of preparation and anticipation ended this way. Garon believed Rebecca's death was atonement for sins. Rayleigh looked directly at him, questioning if he was avenging family. But Garen answered he did it for more important honor. This answer made Rayleigh feel absurd and disgusted. She mocked him for being so hypocritical, despising others yet doing the same thing, using tests to achieve personal revenge, no different from what he detested. But Garen only uttered a pale apology. Disappointment and cold anger intertwined and rose in Rayleigh's heart. The instant she opened her eyes, vast magic power burst uncontrollably. Garen looked at her in disbelief, asking if she wanted to fight. The test had already ended. Why was she still so persistent? He sneered, asking if she wanted to avenge that scoundrel friend. Rayleigh denied this statement in her heart. The source of her anger wasn't friendship but the destroyed plan. She didn't care about their grudges, only about results. Because of Rebecca's death, her year of effort turned to bubbles. This wasted time must make him pay the price too. Garen admitted she was a troublesome yet supremely skilled opponent. But he also saw her power wasn't yet sufficient to pierce his defense. Rayleigh had already charged forward, her fist wrapped in magic power smashing down. Garen dodged sideways as a huge magic barrier instantly expanded. Rayleigh fired 5 magic missiles in succession, all steadily caught by that barrier. The rebound force made her retreat. Grimoire also realized the problem. Explosive power alone couldn't break through. They needed stronger firepower. They had to use the ruins environment to find other ways to win. In this critical moment, Grimoire's gaze fell on the corner again. Olivia was still there, chanting spells with complete concentration. A subtle doubt struck through Grimoire's thoughts like lightning. She'd been reciting the same incantation all along. Was this really from fear? It seemed from the start she'd been silently preparing a desperate counterattack. He immediately used telepathy to contact Rayleigh, who was struggling in battle. The game changer to turn the tide had been by their side all along. Garen told them to give up pointless struggle. Grimoire had Rayleigh buy time for Olivia. Rayleigh acted according to plan, requesting more thinking time from Garen. Garen mistook her intention to surrender and arrogantly allowed it. Rayleigh accelerated her thinking. Grimoire prayed Olivia could succeed immediately. He came to Olivia's side, observing her every move, then discovered in shock her incantation pronunciation and structure were flawless, only at a genius level he'd never seen. However, her chanting had one fatal flaw. The most crucial activation spell had long been lost to the river of time. Rayleigh asked through telepathy how to make up for what was missing. Grimoire smiled. He happened to remember this spell he created thousands of years ago. He immediately had Rayleigh become the messenger, passing hope to Olivia. Rayleigh suddenly connected with Olivia through telepathy, telling her the chanting was missing the most crucial link. Olivia looked at her in surprise, new flames burning in her eyes. Rayleigh relayed Grimoire's words, promising to tell her the missing part, but requiring she not ask about the source of this knowledge. Olivia nodded without hesitation. Garen sensed something abnormal at this moment, questioning if they were going to surrender. Responding to him instead were obscure ancient syllables from Rayleigh's mouth. The light in Olivia's eyes grew brighter and brighter. She finally comprehended everything. Garen understood he'd been deceived. They never intended to yield. Just then, bricks began falling on his solid barrier. The entire ruin space began to tremble as if about to collapse. Garen shouted in horror, asking what they'd done. Rayleigh sneered, telling him to ask that glowing teammate himself. Garen's eyes widened, recognizing the source of that power. That was actually long-lost ancient magic. He asked how they activated this power forgotten by time, but Rayleigh reminded him the urgent matter was stopping the spell casting. Otherwise, before the magic completed, he might be buried here. However, Garen threw caution to the wind, shooting several magic missiles toward Olivia. Rayleigh immediately used Dispel magic. Defending while relaying the spell, she'd reached her limit. Olivia's chanting also reached the most critical part. A huge and complex magic circle unfolded beneath her feet. Grimoire looked at her transformation with relief. About to be recreated was forbidden power strong enough to rewrite legends. Light converged, and a magical artifact containing ancient power appeared in her hand. Both Rayleigh and Garen were shocked breathless by this scene. Olivia used all her strength, shouting the final decree. She called upon shining light and scorching flames to return to this world. The next second, a huge fireball tore through the sky, falling like divine punishment. Grimoire looked at that soaring firelight, feeling incredulous. This was the power Olivia unleashed on her first attempt. Her talent was truly astonishing. He hastily checked Rayleigh's condition, finding she was only exhausted with no major harm. Olivia stumbled over to show concern, but clumsily tripped over a stone. Grimoire felt helpless, then began serious assessment. She possessed extraordinary focus, perseverance, and ancient magic talent. Though not perfect yet, her growth potential was absolutely limitless. Rayleigh woke up, and Grimoire breathed a sigh of relief. She struggled to get up, insisting on checking Garen's condition first. Grimoire judged the opponent was severely injured and needed weeks to recover. Rayleigh recalled that terrifying scene. Flames descended like divine punishment. At the last moment, Garen cast expert-level defensive magic. That solid triangular shield blocked most of the explosive impact. What surprised Rayleigh most was he actually protected them within it too. Grimoire also pointed out without this, they would have been severely injured. This seemed to indicate Garen never intended to kill from the start, but Rayleigh couldn't understand why he attacked as if to kill her. Grimoire lightly poked her face as a reminder. Clearly she attacked first. Rayleigh was instantly speechless. She bent down to give them emergency treatment, stabilizing their energy circuits. Then she took their team's core. She considered this equivalent retaliation, hoping to battle again next year. Then threw the core down the bottomless cliff, ensuring no one could retrieve it. She examined their own core, finally deciding to keep it as a memento, putting it in her bag. She invited Olivia to walk in the garden before the test ended. The tranquility in the ruins seemed especially precious, but Olivia couldn't help asking the doubt in her heart. She wanted to know why Rayleigh knew the key to ancient magic. Rayleigh only calmly reminded her she'd promised not to ask. Olivia immediately lowered her head like she'd made a mistake, dejected yet obedient. Grimoire thought this girl was really too easy to handle. The atmosphere suddenly became somewhat heavy. They coincidentally thought of Rebecca. Rayleigh felt sad about the exam and losing a teammate, but Grimoire's voice rang out, bringing comfort. He thought this experience wasn't perfect, but the gains were still precious, so delaying a year was no problem. They could challenge again, ultimately entering Irantis Tower to expose that fraud. Rayleigh promised to reclaim the stolen achievements. Grimoire corrected, saying pursuing immortality was originally his dream. He just had his disciple Marta complete this research for him. If contractors could gain eternal life, he wouldn't need to change new partners. Before Marta, many disciples had participated in this research. That immortality spell was the crystallization of collective wisdom, not one person's merit. After listening, Rayleigh's thought of revenge became even more determined. They must seek justice for the deceived Grimoire and his disciples. Grimoire also encouraged her. Training another year was completely fine. Just then, a drop of black liquid suddenly dripped on Rayleigh's face. They looked up in shock to see Rebecca hanging upside down overhead. Rebecca shouted desperately for them to quickly put her down. Everyone stared with eyes wide in disbelief. Rayleigh asked why she was still alive. Rebecca angrily clarified Garen's lie. Rayleigh recalled Garen's threat at the time. That was actually a trick to force them to give up. But Grimoire discovered why he couldn't sense Rebecca's presence. Her entire body was wrapped in dragon skin, energy completely shielded. Rayleigh cast Dispel magic, and the ropes broke in response. Rebecca breathed a long sigh of relief after landing, finally recovering her spirit. She sincerely praised Rayleigh's exquisite spellwork, because she just couldn't break free from this binding no matter what. Rayleigh modestly attributed it to effort, yet felt a trace of strangeness inside. She and Grimoire exchanged glances, simultaneously sensing something wrong. Rebecca had no injuries at all. This was too unusual, as if she'd never truly fought that powerful mage. Rayleigh asked Rebecca why Garen spared her. Rebecca fell silent, her eyes flickering uncertainly. Then she gave a perfunctory reason, saying he disdained killing her, also saying making her give up the test was Garen's required atonement method. But Rayleigh was even more puzzled. They unanimously believed Garen would never forgive her for such a reason. That deep resentment couldn't easily dissipate. Unless Rebecca paid with her life, it couldn't be appeased. Yet she now stood here intact, clearly lying. Perhaps because tests were being monitored by high-level mages, or perhaps she had unspeakable difficulties. Rayleigh decided not to press further, as long as her companion was alive. Rebecca forced a smile, thinking the team had already given up on the test. She self-mockingly said she'd take the exam for the fourth time, yet her tone couldn't hide disappointment. Rayleigh and Olivia saw through her disguise. They could only take out that brilliant core. Light illuminated Rebecca's dazed face. Immediately after, ecstatic screams tore through the forest silence. Rebecca danced and cheered, excitedly jumping up. Rayleigh looked at her noisy teammate, warmth rising in her heart. However, on the other side, the atmosphere dropped to freezing point. Dorothy's sobbing was intermittent, full of self-blame. Our Arpel also took responsibility for the failure on himself. He believed his underestimation led to complete defeat. If they'd fought with full strength from the start, the outcome might be different. Garen listened silently, knowing in his heart the truth wasn't so. Even if the two joined forces, they might not match that novice. Battle traces showed they'd also fought seriously at the time, and that girl even dared to confront him head-on alone at the end. The talent and courage she displayed far exceeded his imagination. He smiled bitterly, taking all responsibility upon himself. Expectations of entering the Mage Tower falling through made him feel deeply tired. Arpel comforted him there was still a chance next year. Dorothy also rallied to agree. Garen looked at his young teammates, warmth rising in his heart. Just then, new figures blocked their path. Another team holding a core appeared before them. The lead, Pamela, was a powerful mage skilled in tracking. Garen's heart tightened, thinking how to avoid conflict. He was about to speak, explaining they had no intention to fight, but Pamela smiled and did something astonishing. She directly knelt down, offering her own core, loudly announcing surrender, requesting Garen's team accept it. Pamela's teammates were also shocked. They'd already let one go before. Why give out another now? Pamela only asked coldly who dared oppose Theowalt. Hearing this surname, questioning voices instantly became frightened gasps. Pamela said optimistically there were 10 minutes remaining. She believed they could find the last core. At this moment in the observation room, the administrator showed a smile. She recorded the final results, announcing the second test ended. After going through hardships returning to the surface, everyone was exhausted. Though Rebecca's injuries had healed, fatigue still followed like a shadow. What she cared most about was the final selection exam coming in a week. That would be one-on-one interviews with the Grand Mages of the top 5 towers. Grimoire thought this was an excellent opportunity to showcase Rayleigh's talents. More importantly, they could finally meet that detestable Yanarantis. Rebecca decided to find friends to stay with. Rayleigh recalled being tricked into staying at a shabby inn by her. She couldn't help rolling her eyes. Rebecca said goodbye with a smile, agreeing to meet again in a week. Olivia stayed at the same hotel as Rayleigh but planned to go to the library first. Rayleigh walked back to Stinwood Grand Hotel alone. She fantasized about the pleasant time of hot baths and enjoying room service ice cream. However, the moment she pushed open the door, all fantasies shattered. Garen and his teammates were also staying here. Before Rayleigh could react, Dorothy had already rushed to the door like a whirlwind. She stared at Rayleigh for a second with resentful eyes, then immediately switched to a brilliant smile. She enthusiastically hugged Rayleigh, introducing herself. She stated frankly she really liked cute and pretty girls like Rayleigh. Rayleigh took the opportunity to ask why they passed the second stage, learning someone actually gifted a core to Garen in the last 10 minutes. Garen calmly informed that team also advanced. They hadn't expected such an absurd thing to happen. At this moment, Arpel invited Rayleigh to share the feast prepared by the royal chef. Rayleigh immediately forgot everything and hastily agreed. At the table, Rayleigh ate the delicious food with great satisfaction. Grimoire teased her for being greedy, while she retorted she was still growing. At this moment, Pamela's excited conversation caught their attention. She was loudly complaining about the administrator's absurd act of placing cores at cliff bottoms. The real culprit, Rayleigh, silently lowered her head to eat. Garen praised Pamela as the best pathfinder, but Pamela attributed all credit to her silent disciple beside her. She called Gilbert a genius she secretly cultivated. Garen showed interest, wanting to know more about him. Pamela immediately began eloquently praising her disciple's talents. Gilbert listened to the praise but said nothing. Grimoire thought this person was truly immodest. At this moment, Pamela said Gilbert's speed passing the first test was unmatched. Dorothy interjected, mentioning Rebecca's 4-hour record. Pamela dismissed this, thinking Rebecca using clones was cheating. Therefore, Garen was first. Her Gilbert should rightfully rank second. But Garen calmly spoke, saying there was a misunderstanding. He wasn't referring to Rebecca. Instead, he turned his gaze to Rayleigh, asking how long Rayleigh took to pass the first test. Rayleigh answered truthfully, about 6.5 hours. This number made the table instantly fall silent. Garen's face showed a proud smile as if it were expected. Pamela was dumbfounded, completely unable to believe it. The silent Gilbert suddenly put down his utensils. He stared hard at Rayleigh, raising doubts. A novice could never pass the exam so smoothly. He implied there might be unknown cheating methods behind this. Grimoire felt very speechless, but Rayleigh didn't care at all. Dorothy's eyes turned cold, then the powerful magic power emanating questioned if he could defeat herself. Gilbert was instantly speechless. He knew well Dorothy's strength was unfathomable. Seeing his silence, Dorothy coldly embraced Rayleigh and announced the result. Both she and Arpel had already lost to Rayleigh. Gilbert thought this completely defied logic. Garen put down his utensils at this moment, calmly intervening in this dispute. He said he understood Gilbert's confusion, because everyone had once underestimated Rayleigh. Doubt was a mage's nature, but circumstances and propriety must be considered. Expressing hostility at this celebratory table was clearly inappropriate. Gilbert lowered his head awkwardly, realizing his loss of composure. Pamela hastily smoothed things over, apologizing for her disciple's rudeness. Finally, Gilbert bowed in apology, and Garen magnanimously expressed forgiveness, but he added if truly doubting, they might as well spar afterward to verify. Hearing this, Rayleigh immediately cast a bring-it-on look. Gilbert's heart choked. He involuntarily felt timid. Grimoire thought her threat was truly unnecessary, but Rayleigh thought this was just to eliminate future troubles and get some peace. At this moment, a knock sounded. Pamela smiled, letting the new guest enter, but upon seeing Olivia, her smile immediately turned into a scream. Pamela then fainted. The gathering hastily ended in chaos, and Rayleigh Rayleigh also rose to leave. On the way back, she suddenly proposed a bold idea. She wanted to know if there was a way to experience the second awakening early. Grimoire wasn't surprised. He'd already sensed she'd reached a bottleneck, and the second awakening was a mage's fastest growth period after adulthood. Her current attack methods were limited. Early awakening was indeed the best way to break through, but this was called early awakening. The process would violate natural laws. It was extremely difficult and painful. Successful cases were rare as phoenix feathers. He asked if she could endure it. Rayleigh's answer had no hesitation. She said decisively to do it. Grimoire smiled. This suited him perfectly. Returning to the room, Rayleigh began in-depth study of awakening principles. She learned mages' bodies contained an elemental seed. It needed magic power irrigation to awaken. This trapped her in paradox. She needed more magic to wake the seed, and the seed waking would provide more magic. Grimoire revealed the key. This process began with a lie. She had to deceive her own magic heart, making it believe magic power was already abundant, using this to trick the elemental seed into releasing power early and feeding back. This required dozens of stages of arduous preparation, about 5 weeks total. He emphasized again, this would be the most painful hell trial yet, and encouraged her with the motto, greater pain brings sweeter rewards. Rayleigh just glanced at him. She didn't buy this at all. She closed the book, preparing to start immediately. Rayleigh condensed the first wisp of magic power. Following guidance, she began constructing illusory strength toward the inner seed. Unfamiliar severe pain instantly swept over, as if flesh was being torn. Grimoire told her she must endure. This was just the beginning. Based on Grimoire's experience, magic awakening would accompany tremendous pain. Blood vessels throughout the body felt like flames burning. He had Rayleigh prepare. The next 5 weeks would be like hell. But 5 days later, Rayleigh no longer needed his encouragement. The magic orb dancing in her palm announced awakening was already complete. Rayleigh breathed a sigh of relief, thinking the mentor's earlier description was just motivation, but Grimoire looked at her like looking at a monster. He hadn't exaggerated at all. This was torment. Ordinary people needed 5 weeks to endure. His other disciples had all fainted from pain, yet Rayleigh found the pain bearable, even able to control the rhythm. She mentioned indifferently she'd experienced worse at the Thieves Guild. Grimoire couldn't help pressing, what exactly did they do to her there? Rayleigh fell into painful memories. At that time she was tied to a pillar, watching others enjoy delicious food. She could only gnaw on dry, hard chicken breast with no drinks. She stated firmly that was countless times more painful than magic awakening. Grimoire could only determine she was a freak, but he also couldn't hide his satisfaction, because her element was excellent. Lightning element combined fire's destructive power with wind's swiftness. Very comprehensive. He was curious if her experience was related to lightning, like being struck. After all, magic elements were often closely connected to people's experiences. Rayleigh shook her head in denial. She'd never had any contact with lightning. Grimoire speculated perhaps this related to her thief agility characteristics. Rayleigh was eager to try out her newly gained power. Grimoire also agreed on the importance of actual combat, proposing to go out and find opponents. However, upon opening the door, both were stunned. Gilbert was actually standing outside. Gilbert was also startled, then shouted his obsession. He demanded an upright duel with Rayleigh. Rayleigh and Grimoire were delighted. An opponent actually delivered themselves. Not long after, Gilbert felt something was wrong. Things quickly spiraled out of control as news attracted countless spectators. Even exam administrators and people from major mage towers came. Gilbert stood bewildered in the crowd. He didn't understand why a simple duel would draw such a formation. Thoughts pulled him back 5 days ago. He firmly believed he was definitely not afraid. 4 days ago, he began searching for Rayleigh but never saw her. 3 days ago, he learned from Garen she lived in the opposite room. 2 days ago, he knocked to challenge but got no response. This made him overjoyed, convinced she was avoiding out of cowardice. 1 day ago, he was even more certain the opponent was just a coward. But now, looking at the bustling scene, confidence began to waver. Especially seeing Rayleigh talking with Garon, his heart grew increasingly uncertain. Fortunately, mentor Pamela appeared in time, patting his shoulder for encouragement. She reminded Gilbert the opponent was just an unawakened novice, and this duel was being watched by big shots in the magic world. This was an excellent opportunity to prove his genius name to everyone. Gilbert instantly regained confidence, his chest puffing out again. The host loudly introduced both sides, pushing the atmosphere to climax. On one side was genius disciple Gilbert Winifred. On the other side was newcomer Rayleigh. The order to begin the duel fell. The last trace of hesitation in Gilbert's heart was replaced by ambition. It was time to show her the true gap between genius and ordinary people. All eyes focused, waiting to witness the result of this duel.